Yo, what's up everyone? It's Wizardium and today we're checking out what if Percy Jackson and Harry Potter were raised as brothers by Sirius Black. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The House on the Boundary. The house had no right to be as loud as it was at 7 in the morning. Percy Jackson hit the kitchen floor at a dead sprint, vaulted over the overturned chair that had been there since Tuesday, and skidded to a stop at the counter, just in time to yank the smoking pan off the burner before it achieved full combustion. The eggs inside were black around the edges and aggressively orange in the middle, which meant Sirius had been cooking again, which meant Sirius had once again forgotten that cooking required you to actually watch the pan instead of reading the newspaper with your feet on the table. You left the eggs, Percy said. Sirius didn't look up from the paper. He was sitting at the kitchen table in a moth-eaten dressing gown, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, reading the Edinburgh Courier with the focused intensity of a man who had nothing else to do, which Percy supposed was technically accurate. I was going to come back to them. They were on fire, small fire, Sirius, Perseus. Percy set the pan in the sink and ran cold water over it. The resulting hiss was dramatic and deeply satisfying. He turned around and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, wearing the expression he'd spent 3 years perfecting, the one that said, "I am 13 years old and I am the most responsible person in this house," which was unfortunately true. The kitchen of number 14 Blackthorn Close was a long, warm room with low beams and mismatched tiles and a window that looked out over the cobbled Edinburgh lane, where the morning fog was still deciding whether to lift. There were herbs hanging from the ceiling. Sirius had gone through a brief and chaotic interest in potions brewing last spring, and a cork board on the far wall covered in overlapping layers of notes, letters, photographs, and at least 2 drawings Percy had done at age 11 that Sirius had tacked up without asking and refused to take down. It was in every possible way the most disorganized home Percy had ever lived in, which was saying something given that he'd shared a cramped New York apartment with his mother for his entire life. He loved it here completely and unreservedly and had never said so out loud. "Where's Harry?" he asked. "Still asleep. It's 7. He was up until 2. I heard him." Percy frowned. He'd heard it too, the quiet sounds of someone moving around a room with practiced care, trying not to wake anyone. He'd almost gone to check, then decided against it because there were things Harry worked through better alone, and Percy had learned slowly, imperfectly, through exactly the kind of trial and error that resulted in 2 broken mugs and 1 very long argument to tell the difference. Was he reading again? Sirius turned a page. Or writing. Light was on under his door. Percy opened the fridge, found it largely empty except for half a block of cheese, leftover pasta, and a jar of something purple that had been there long enough to become its own ecosystem. He pulled out the cheese and started cutting slices. "We need to go shopping. We always need to go shopping, because you keep trying to cook. I'm an excellent cook. You set eggs on fire." They were almost done. Percy put 4 slices of cheese on bread, ate one standing at the counter, and was halfway through constructing a stack that could only generously be described as a sandwich when the ceiling above them creaked. Once, twice, the specific rhythm that meant Harry was awake and moving, crossing from his bed to the window, which he always checked first. Percy had noticed that. Harry always checked the window first, like he was confirming where he was. He'd never asked about it. He didn't need to. He knew enough of what the Dursleys had been to understand why waking up somewhere good was still something you had to verify. 3 minutes later, Harry came downstairs in a faded red jumper and jeans, his hair doing something architecturally improbable in 4 different directions at once, his glasses slightly crooked. He saw the dead pan in the sink, looked at Sirius and said, "Again." "Small fire," Percy said, in perfect unison with Sirius saying barely anything. Harry smiled. It was the quiet kind, the one that didn't announce itself, just appeared. He pulled out the chair across from Sirius and dropped into it, reaching for the newspaper without asking. Sirius let him have it without looking up, which was its own kind of language. "There's cheese," Percy said. "That's all. Cheese is fine." Percy tossed him the remaining slices. Harry caught them without looking, which still impressed Percy every single time, and started eating without ceremony. For a few minutes, the kitchen held the specific, comfortable silence of people who have lived together long enough to not need noise. The fog outside was thinning. Somewhere down the close, someone was rolling a bin out to the street. The house itself made the small sounds old houses make, the tick of the pipes, the soft argument of a window not quite fitting its frame. Then the mail arrived. It came, as it always did in this house, in 2 separate deliveries, the ordinary post through the slot in the front door, and the magical post through the small opening behind the kitchen clock that Sirius had hexed specifically for the purpose. Percy had been fascinated by this when he first arrived. He'd spent an entire afternoon opening and closing the clock compartment until Harry had threatened to transfigure him into a coat rack. This morning, both deliveries arrived at the same time. The mundane letters fluttered through the front slot. Percy could hear them from the kitchen. Simultaneously, a large roll of parchment shot through the clock compartment and hit Sirius square in the back of the head. Sirius caught it without flinching, which suggested this had happened before. Harry had his wand out before Percy registered what he'd seen, not pointed at anything specific, just held, his eyes sharp, because 2 deliveries at once wasn't normal, and Harry's baseline assumption was still, after everything, something is probably wrong. It wasn't paranoia exactly, it was 3 years of being right. Easy, Sirius said. He was already unrolling the parchment. His expression shifted as he read, not dramatically the way adults performed emotions, but subtly, the particular shift of someone absorbing information they expected but weren't quite ready for. It's from Chiron. Percy put down his cheese. What does he want? He wants you back at camp 3 weeks early. Why? Sirius didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. He kept reading, his grey eyes moving over the parchment with increasing focus. Percy felt the thing in his chest that he'd had since he was 11, not quite anxiety, not quite readiness, the specific sensation of standing at the edge of something very large that was about to move. Sirius, he said. He says there's been activity on the western borders, multiple Impulsi sightings near the Long Island Sound, something disturbed them and he doesn't know what. Sirius set the parchment down flat on the table. He wants experienced campers back early to help shore things up. I'm 13, you're experienced, there's a difference. Sirius said it simply, without flattery, which was exactly why Percy believed it. Sirius wasn't one for reassurance as a performance. When he said something complimentary, he meant it, and he moved on, which was one of about 40 reasons Percy trusted him more than he trusted most people on Earth. From the front hall, there was the soft thump of ordinary letters landing. Harry was already getting up. He had the specific alertness of someone who'd heard something in the regular mail and wanted to check it before they acknowledged it, the deeply ingrained habit of intercepting his own correspondence before anyone else could decide what he was and wasn't allowed to have. He came back 30 seconds later with 3 envelopes, one of which was the unmistakable thick cream of Hogwarts stationery. He stared at it for a moment. Then he sat back down and put it on the table in front of him without opening it. Percy looked at the envelope, then at Harry. That's your letter. I know, your 3rd-year letter. I can count. Are you going to open it? Harry picked up his remaining cheese and ate it. Percy waited. Sirius had gone very still in the way he did when he was paying close attention while appearing not to. Harry started, stopped, tried again. Last year was a lot. That was one way to put it. Percy knew the shape of last year the way he knew the shape of a storm from the outside, through what Sirius had told him and what Harry had let slip in pieces over the months since. The basilisk, the diary, the girl who'd nearly died, the chamber beneath a school that was supposed to be safe. Harry had handled all of it, and he'd handled it well, and he'd come out the other side of it with that quiet, careful self that didn't quite believe it was allowed to need things. It'll be different this year, Percy said. People always say that. I'm saying it because I'll be there. Harry looked up then, and something shifted in his expression, the careful thing dropping away for just a second, replaced by something younger and less defended. He hadn't known until this moment that Percy had already decided. Percy could see the not knowing in him and was annoyed at himself for not having said it plainly sooner. Chiron wants you back at camp, Harry said. Chiron wants me back at camp in 3 weeks. Hogwarts starts in September. Math works out. You can't go to Hogwarts, you're not enrolled. Percy looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at the ceiling with the serene expression of a man who has already filled out all the relevant paperwork. Harry followed Percy's look, then he looked at the ceiling too, as though the answer might be written there. Then he looked back at Sirius. You enrolled him. I sent a letter to Dumbledore in March, Sirius said. Explained the situation. He was remarkably understanding. Percy will be joining your year as a transfer student, pending an assessment from Professor Flitwick on the first day. I don't know any magic, Percy pointed out. You don't know any wand magic, there's a difference. And Dumbledore was quite interested in the particulars of what you can do. He said, and I'm quoting directly, how delightfully unprecedented. Harry was staring at his guardian with an expression Percy had learned to read as fond exasperation. You've been planning this since March. I've been planning this since January. March is when I sent the letter. Why didn't you tell us? I was going to tell you this morning. Sirius nodded at the Hogwarts envelope. Open your letter, Harry. Harry opened the letter. Percy leaned sideways to read it over his shoulder, which Harry allowed with the resigned tolerance of someone who had stopped trying to maintain personal space approximately 14 months ago. The letter was standard, welcome back. Here was the book list, here were the dates, here was a reminder about the Hogsmeade permission forms. Harry got to the 2nd page and went quiet. Percy read the line that had stopped him. This year, Hogwarts will be hosting a number of additional students for the autumn term as part of a new inter-school exchange program. We hope all students will extend a warm welcome. That's me, Percy said. I'm the exchange program. You're one student. Dumbledore said students, plural. They both looked at Sirius again. Sirius had returned to reading the paper. There may be 1 or 2 others, from Camp Half-Blood. From various places, Dumbledore has been busy. Percy sat back in his chair and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that he'd been meaning to mention for 3 months. Outside, a gust of wind moved through the close and rattled the window. He felt it the way he always felt wind off the sea, not just physically but deeper, the part of him that was connected to something older and broader than any one country or any one school. He thought about Camp Half-Blood. About the Long Island Sound and the smell of the mess hall and the particular competitive joy of capture the flag. He thought about Annabeth, who would have opinions about Hogwarts that would be specific, detailed, and exhaustive. He thought about his mother, who was alive and safe in New York and called every Sunday, which was the arrangement they'd made when he came to Edinburgh, which Sally had agreed to with the calm practicality of a woman who understood that her son was going to be in danger regardless, and at least here the danger came with a trained aura attached. Then he thought about the past 8 months, about this house, these mornings, the training sessions in the back garden, the nights Harry came down to the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and Percy was already there because neither of them slept well when things were unsettled, about Sirius teaching both of them to play chess and being soundly beaten by both of them within a month, about the specific rhythm of a life that was chaotic and undersupplied, and more real than anything Percy had lived in before. He'd been going to Hogwarts in September since January. He'd made the decision without quite naming it as a decision, the way he made most decisions, by imagining the alternative and noticing that the alternative was unacceptable. "I need better robes than I have," he said finally. Sirius lowered the paper. His expression was, briefly, completely unguarded, the face of a man who had expected to have to argue and didn't know what to do with not having to. Percy had seen it before. It never stopped being a little heartbreaking. "Diagon Alley," Harry said, practical as always. "We can go next week." "And Chiron's message?" Percy asked. Sirius folded the parchment carefully, the way he handled things that mattered. "I'll write back today. I'll explain the situation. Chiron will understand. And if he doesn't, then I'll explain it less politely." He paused. "He'll understand. He's known your mother for years, and he knows what you being at Hogwarts means. He won't pull you back for impulse patrol when there are 100 other campers who can do it." He met Percy's eyes. "You being with Harry matters more than the western border." Percy didn't ask why. He understood why. He'd understood it since the night 6 months ago when Sirius had sat both of them down at this same table, with the same fog outside the window, and had told them things about their futures that no 13-year-old should have to hear, prophecies and dark lords and ancient powers stirring in the deep places of 2 separate worlds. He'd handled it about as well as Harry had, which was to say they'd both gone very quiet, and then Percy had said something rude in ancient Greek, and Harry had laughed, and somehow that had been enough to make it survivable. The morning settled back into its comfortable noise. Sirius started trying to figure out what else was in the fridge. Harry read back through his Hogwarts letter, making small notes in the margin of things he needed to get. Percy cleared the dead pan from the sink and started washing it, looking out the window at the Edinburgh lane where the fog had finally decided to lift. He was thinking about Hogwarts, about what it would feel like to walk into a place where the magic was different from everything he knew, not the old, wild power of Olympus and the sea, but something channeled through wood and Latin and centuries of careful tradition. He was curious about it the way he was curious about most things, directly, without a lot of preamble, with the slightly reckless appetite for new experience that his mother called very Percy and that Ares, on the one occasion they'd met, had called suicidal overconfidence. Percy considered it enthusiasm. Perspective was everything. The back garden was a long, narrow strip of grass and stubborn weeds enclosed by old stone walls. Sirius had spelled it so that it was invisible from the neighboring gardens and muffled against sound, which made it ideal for the kind of training that tended to involve controlled flooding, the occasional small earthquake, and Harry setting things dramatically on fire. They'd been training together since January, 3 mornings a week, with Sirius refereeing and occasionally joining in when he was feeling well enough. He'd been an aura before Azkaban, and even after 12 years in a cell he moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd fought seriously and survived it. He'd never once pulled his punches in a training session. Percy had respected that from the first week. This morning they were doing combat coordination. The exercise was simple in concept. Harry stood at one end of the garden, Percy at the other, and they had to disable each other's shields, Harry using wand work, Percy using water drawn from the rain barrel in the corner, without leaving the marked square in the center that Sirius had drawn in chalk. The square was roughly 4 meters by 4 meters. It was deliberately too small. "Ready." Sirius called from his place by the back wall, where he was sitting on an overturned bucket with his wand across his knees and a thermos of tea. "No," Percy said. "Good." Sirius pointed at Harry. "Go." Harry moved first because he always did, because his instinct was to take the initiative before the situation could do it for him. He cast a shield charm simultaneously with a stupefy, not aimed to hit, aimed to force Percy left, where the footing was worse near the garden beds. It was a good read. Percy had been drifting left. Percy drifted left anyway and pulled water from the barrel in a curving arc, not to block but to redirect. He let the stupefy pass through the space where he'd been and bent the water around behind Harry, where it hovered, waiting, a suspended threat that cost Percy almost nothing to maintain. Harry glanced back, assessed, turned it into a quarter turn instead of a full one, keeping Percy in his sightline. "That's annoying," he said. "That's the point. If I cast Expelliarmus, I'll drop the water on you. If I cast a shield first, I'll collapse the water before you finish." Harry considered this with the focused calm that Percy had come to think of as his actual combat mode, not flashy, not loud, just very, very efficient. Percy tightened his control of the floating water column and waited. Then Harry cast Expelliarmus, but not at Percy. He cast it at the water. The jet hit the column and scattered it, water going everywhere, including over both of them, which wasn't ideal, and in the half-second Percy spent reabsorbing and regathering, Harry had crossed half the square and was inside Percy's reach. Percy didn't fight the close quarters. He let the water drop and shoved Harry with both hands, using just enough of his divine strength to move him without actually hurting him, and Harry stumbled back a step, turned it into a roll, came up with his wand pointed and a shield blooming between them. "Stop," Sirius said. They both stopped. Sirius was writing something in the small notebook he kept during sessions. He didn't look up. "Percy, why did you stop using the water?" Harry scattered it. "All of it." He scattered the column. "The rain barrel is still full." Sirius finally looked up. "You have a source. You stopped thinking about the source because you got into close quarters. That's a pattern." He underlined something in the notebook. What else? He could have. He hadn't, though. What else? Percy thought back. He'd felt it at the time, a flicker of something, and dismissed it as the wrong read. He telegraphed the Expelliarmus. His wrist movement was too wide. "I thought he was setting up for something else." "He was. He knew you'd identify the Expelliarmus from the wrist. He made it deliberately wide so you'd misread it as a feint." Sirius looked at Harry. "Good. Why didn't you press the advantage in close quarters?" Harry pushed his wet fringe out of his eyes. "Percy's stronger than me in direct contact. If he gets both hands on me, it's over. So I needed distance, but I overcommitted to the role and came up with my back to the wall. If Percy had pressed instead of holding position, I'd have been stuck." "You were stuck," Percy said. "I just didn't want to fold you into the wall. It was a training exercise you could have. You're human, the wall is stone, there's a difference." Sirius made a note. "Harry, work on your recovery positioning. Percy, work on multi-source management. You have the ability to pull from every water source in 50 meters. In an actual fight, that's the difference between winning in 10 seconds and spending 5 minutes trading shots." He capped his pen. "Go again." They went again. They went again 4 more times after that, until Percy's arms ached from sustained control and Harry was moving on reflex alone, and the garden was thoroughly wet and the chalk square had entirely dissolved, and Sirius had finished his tea and gone to make more. The last session Percy won cleanly. He came in from 2 angles simultaneously, barrel water left and roof runoff right. Harry burned through his shield, sustaining 2 counter-curses at once, and Percy walked forward through the collapsing defenses and put a hand flat on Harry's chest and said, "Done." Harry looked up at him from where he'd ended up with one knee on the wet grass. He was breathing hard. The expression was the specific one that meant that was good. "I'm going to figure out how you did it, and next time I'll be ready." "You used the gutters," Harry said. "Yeah, I forgot about the gutters." "I know." Harry got up. He was almost exactly Percy's height. Harry had grown 4 inches since January and wasn't done yet, and Percy had the distinct suspicion they were going to end up the same size, which had prompted an ongoing and only semi-joking debate about who was technically bigger. "If we hadn't called it, I would have gotten out of it." "Maybe," Percy said. "You know I would have. I know you'd have tried. That's different." Harry flicked water off his fringe directly at Percy's face. Percy caught it midair before it arrived and redirected it into Harry's collar, and Harry made an undignified noise and grabbed the neck of his jumper to let it out. And by the time they got back inside, they were arguing about the gutters versus the rain barrel as distinct tactical resources, which was the kind of argument that would have been completely unintelligible to any normal person, and that both of them loved. Sirius was at the stove again, which immediately produced renewed concern, but this time he was just boiling a kettle. He handed them both mugs without ceremony and sat back down at the table where he'd apparently been doing paperwork. There were forms spread out in front of him, covered in his sharp, slanted handwriting. "What's all that?" Harry asked, toweling off his glasses. "Forms for the ministry, my ongoing status review." Sirius said it with the lightness of someone who had decided long ago not to give a thing the weight it might deserve. Percy knew what the forms were. Every 6 months, Sirius had to submit documentation confirming his whereabouts, his activities, his status as a guardian, and his mental fitness, as part of the provisional arrangement that had let him out of Azkaban before his formal exoneration, which was still pending, which had been pending for 2.5 years. The ministry moved like cold treacle on everything, except when it came to restricting things, and then it moved with alarming speed. "Anything they're questioning?" Harry asked. "The usual. They want to know why we moved from London." He paused. "And there's a note about Percy. They're asking again for documentation confirming his legal status in Britain." Percy wrapped both hands around his mug. He was an American citizen, the son of a woman who'd lived in New York her entire life. He was also the son of a Greek god, which wasn't documented anywhere because gods generally didn't sign birth certificates, which created a specific and ongoing bureaucratic problem with the British Ministry of Magic that Sirius found infuriating and Percy found darkly funny. "They're worried I'm illegal," Percy said. "They're worried about a lot of things, most of them irrelevant." Sirius gathered the forms into a stack. "I have a meeting with Dumbledore next week about Hogwarts. I'll bring it up then. Dumbledore has more pull with the ministry than I do at the moment, and he's made it clear he's interested in having you at the school." He paused. More than clear, he used the phrase profoundly valuable twice in his last letter. That's slightly unsettling, Harry said. That's Dumbledore. He's interested in things that are unprecedented. You're unprecedented. Both of you are unprecedented. Sirius said it matter-of-factly, not as a warning. He's not going to do anything with that interest that isn't in your interests. He just has a way of making people feel like exhibits. I'll manage, Percy said. I know you will. Sirius looked at him for a moment, then at Harry. You both know your session this afternoon is with me, not each other. Percy straightened slightly. Harry put his mug down. Sirius's solo sessions were different from the joint ones. They were more intense, more specific, more personally demanding, and they always ended with a conversation that wasn't about tactics or technique. It was the part of the training that Percy had been resistant to at first, not the physical work, which he could do with his eyes closed, but the talking. The part where Sirius asked questions that didn't have clean answers. Individual or together? Harry asked. Together. Sirius picked up his tea. There's something I need to tell you both, and the training is how I'm going to set it up. You'll understand why once we're through it. They looked at each other across the table, the quick wordless exchange of brothers who have developed, through repeated shared experience, a fairly accurate read of what each other is thinking. How bad, Harry's look said, not the worst kind. Percy's look said back, but not nothing. Harry nodded marginally and picked up his mug. Percy did the same. Whatever it was, they'd get through it. They always had. The afternoon session was the most demanding thing Sirius had put them through in months. He worked Harry through a sequence of rapid-fire non-verbal spells, each one faster than the last, until Harry was casting entirely on instinct, his wand moving before his conscious mind had finished forming the thought. He worked Percy through sustained multi-source control in moving conditions, Sirius himself moving through the garden at aura speed, disrupting Percy's lines of pull, forcing him to adapt and adapt and adapt until the adaptation was automatic. Then he put them up against each other with no parameters, no square, no rules, no point at which he'd call a stop. It lasted 11 minutes. Percy won, but only because Harry slipped on the wet grass in the 4th minute and gave Percy a half-second opening that Percy took without hesitation, and Harry's shield was already overextended from a combination attack that hadn't quite paid off, and when the water came from 3 sides at once there wasn't enough of it left to counter. Harry lay flat on the grass staring at the grey Edinburgh sky, breathing. Percy stood over him, not quite steady himself, arms aching down to the bone. Done? Percy asked. Done, Harry said. They sat together on the back step while Sirius paced, which was his tell. He only paced when he was organizing a difficult thing into sentences. Percy had noticed it the first time 3 months in and had never mentioned it because it seemed important to let Sirius find his way to words in his own time. I've been sitting on something, Sirius said, finally stopping. He turned to face them. The afternoon light was going orange at the edges, the way Edinburgh light did in summer, and it made him look older than he usually did. I should have told you both sooner. I've been making sure I understood it fully before I brought it to you. That's my reasoning. Whether it's a good one or not is a separate question. Tell us, Harry said simply. Sirius sat down on the garden wall across from them. He looked at his hands for a moment, then up. You both know your prophecies. Your separate ones. Harry, you know the one the ministry holds. Percy, you know the one from Delphi. I've read both of them. We know, Percy said. He'd read his own. He knew Harry's by heart because Harry had told him on a cold February night when neither of them could sleep, matter-of-factly, the way you tell someone something that you've already processed enough to say out loud. There's a line, Sirius said. In the middle of both of them, he paused. They're not similar, they're not echoes of each other. They're identical, the same phrase, word for word, in both prophecies. He met Harry's eyes, then Percy's. I had Dumbledore verify it without telling him which prophecy I was referencing, and I had a scholar at Camp Half-Blood do the same with yours, Percy. Neither of them knew about the other. The garden was very quiet. The identical line was, and the children of the ancient water shall stand where the old fire ends. What does it mean? Harry asked. I don't know, not entirely. Sirius's voice was steady. He'd clearly spent a long time getting it steady. But it means your situations aren't separate. They're connected. Whatever is coming, Voldemort's continued rise, and whatever is happening in Percy's world with Kronos, they're not two unrelated things happening at the same time. He looked at them both. They're the same thing, from different sides. Percy thought about what that meant. He turned it over the way he turned over water, feeling the shape of it, the weight, the direction of its pull. So the reason we're together, he said slowly, isn't just because of how Sirius found us. It's not a coincidence. I don't think so, no. And Hogwarts is where this starts, Sirius said quietly. Or where it continues. I think it's been starting for a while. I think it started the night both of you survived things you shouldn't have survived, at ages when nothing should have been able to touch you, and something in the deep machinery of both your worlds looked at each other and said, there. He stopped, exhaled. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. We're not frightened, Harry said. He wasn't performing it, he was stating a fact. I know. Sirius looked at him with an expression that Percy had seen before and couldn't quite name. It was something between fierce protectiveness and a particular kind of grief that didn't have anything to do with sadness exactly, more with the awareness of time moving in one direction. I'm telling you because you deserve to know, because I'm done with the people who were supposed to protect you deciding what you can and can't handle. Percy looked at Harry. Harry looked at Percy. Something passed between them that didn't require language, the specific understanding of two people who have fought together, lived together, argued and trained and eaten bad cheese together, and who recognize in each other the thing that cannot be reasoned away, that they are in this completely without a version of events where they aren't. Okay, Percy said, so we go to Hogwarts. We go to Hogwarts, Harry confirmed, and we figure out what the prophecy means. And we deal with whatever's coming. Together, Harry nodded. Together. Sirius looked at both of them for a long moment, then he stood up, brushed grass off his dressing gown, he'd apparently still been in it all day, which was a serious thing that had stopped surprising anyone, and said, right, I'm going to attempt dinner, one of you needs to supervise me. I'll do it, they said simultaneously. I meant one, Sirius said. We both will, Percy said. Collective safety measure. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else and went inside. Percy and Harry sat on the step for another minute, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the overgrown Edinburgh garden in the orange late light, the water in the barrel perfectly still, catching the sky like a held breath. Sea and fire, Harry said quietly. Ancient water, Percy corrected. Same thing, not even close, ask your mythology. I have a demigod brother, why would I read mythology? So you know what I'm dealing with. I know exactly what you're dealing with. Harry stood up and held out a hand. Percy took it and let himself be pulled to his feet. I've been living with you for 8 months. Almost 9. Almost 9, Harry agreed. He pushed open the back door and the smell of something actually cooking, not burning, actually cooking, drifted out, which meant Sirius had either improved dramatically or had given up and ordered something. You know, whatever this is, we're going to be fine. Yeah, Percy said. He didn't say it because he needed reassurance. He said it because it was true, and true things deserve to be said out loud. I know. From inside the kitchen, Sirius called something about the best place to buy robes in Edinburgh that devolved immediately into a complaint about the price of everything in the magical world. And Harry started answering before Percy had fully made it through the door, and the back step was wet from the afternoon's training, and the sky was going purple at the edges, and it was, by every measure Percy knew, a completely ordinary evening. He went inside and closed the door behind him. Chapter 2, Platform 9 3/4, +1, King's Cross on the 1st of September was exactly as chaotic as Percy had been warned, and considerably more chaotic than he'd actually prepared for. He'd been in busy places before. New York was busy in ways that Edinburgh and most of Britain couldn't meaningfully compete with. He'd navigated the Long Island Expressway on the back of a motorcycle being driven by a satyr. He'd fought monsters in Times Square. He'd crossed the country twice on a quest that involved being attacked in basically every state west of the Mississippi. Crowds didn't scare him. Noise didn't scare him. But King's Cross had a specific energy that was hard to categorize. Ordinary London layered over something older and stranger, people moving through it in 2 overlapping streams, the mundane and the magical rubbing shoulders without quite seeing each other, and Percy could feel both streams the way he felt currents in deep water. It made the back of his neck prickle. Trolley, Sirius said. Percy grabbed it before it rolled into a woman in a business suit who was looking at her phone and would not have appreciated the collision. They were moving through the main concourse, Sirius in a long coat with his hair tied back, managing to look both imposing and faintly out of step with the century in a way he was apparently entirely unconscious of. Harry pushing his trolley with his owl headwig riding serenely on top of the cage, ignoring the noise with the aristocratic composure of a bird that has made her peace with public transport. And Percy carrying approximately 40% more luggage than either of them because packing for both a Scottish boarding school and potential monster combat required a specific optimistic approach to bag space. Platforms 9 and 10, Harry said. And then, I know how it works, Percy said. You've never done it. I know how it works. You go through the barrier. It's a wall. It's a barrier that looks like a wall. The distinction matters when you're running at it. I've run at worse things than walls, Harry. At walls specifically, Percy considered. Once the wall came off worse. Sirius turned his head slightly. He had learned in 9 months to recognize when a Percy statement was hyperbole versus when it was a straightforward account of something that had actually happened. His expression suggested he was correctly identifying this as the latter and had decided not to pursue it for the sake of his own peace of mind. They reached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. The mundane stream of King's Cross moved around it without interest. On the other side of the barrier, Percy could feel something not quite magic in the way he'd started to understand Hogwarts magic, with its specific Latin and intention structure, but something older built into the architecture. A threshold, the kind of boundary that acknowledged what you were before it let you through. Harry went first, walking into it with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this twice before. He disappeared. Your turn, Sirius said. Percy squared up to the barrier. He pushed the trolley forward and walked through. The sensation was like the surface of water from underneath, the moment of resistance, and then you were through and the world was different on the other side. Platform 9 3/4 opened up around him in a rush of steam and noise, and the specific smell of an old train that had been running for decades and knew exactly what it was doing. The Hogwarts Express stood along the platform in deep scarlet, enormous and slightly imperious, exhaling slow clouds of white steam into the cool September air. Percy stopped. He'd seen a lot of impressive things. He'd seen Olympus. He'd seen the bottom of the ocean. He'd seen things that would have made most people question their grip on reality. The Hogwarts Express was just a train, and yet standing in front of it, he understood immediately why it had its own mythology. There was something in the way it sat on the platform, like it was waiting specifically, and had been waiting for exactly as long as was necessary and would wait more if it needed to. It felt in a strange way alive. "Right," Harry said, appearing at his shoulder. "Yeah," Percy said. They loaded the luggage. Sirius stood on the platform and watched them do it with the expression Percy associated with all of Sirius's emotional moments. It was the face of a man who has things to say and has decided for now to say them later, filing them in the internal cabinet where he kept everything that mattered most, to be retrieved at some unspecified point when the light was right and the kitchen was quiet. "Sirius," Harry said, turning from the train. "I'm not going to make a speech," Sirius said. "Don't worry, I wasn't worried about a speech." "Good." He pulled Harry into a hug that lasted several seconds and was clearly not planned to last that long but expanded naturally. Harry hugged back without self-consciousness. Percy had watched this particular evolution, Harry at first surprised by physical affection, then tolerating it, then wanting it. 9 months was long enough to see the whole arc of that. Sirius let Harry go and turned to Percy, who had approximately zero intention of making this difficult. He hugged Sirius first before Sirius could try to navigate the logistics of initiating it, which was a tiny power move he was not going to acknowledge as such. Sirius's grip was firm. "Right," he said against Percy's shoulder. "Every week. If anything feels wrong, I'll tell you. Not just to Harry, tell me. I know." And Percy. He pulled back and held him by the shoulders the same way he held Harry, and looked at him with the same grey eyes that held the same specific, unconditional thing. "You're allowed to like it there. Even if it feels like it's not yours, it can be yours." Percy didn't say anything. He nodded once and meant it entirely. He and Harry got on the train. They found a compartment midway along, close enough to the front that they could hear what was happening, far enough back that random first-years wouldn't keep opening the door by accident, which Harry had warned him was a specific and recurring issue. They stowed their bags and sat opposite each other, and the train began to move at exactly 11 o'clock, which Percy noted with approval because he respected punctuality in large mechanical things. They sat in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, watching King's Cross fall away behind them and London come up and then start to give way to the wider, flatter landscape of the home counties. Hedwig shuffled in her cage. Percy ate one of the emergency biscuits he'd packed because the wisdom of emergency biscuits had been proven to him many times. "Right," Harry said. "Rules." Percy raised an eyebrow. "Not rules exactly, things you should know before we get there." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, settling into the tone he used for genuine information transfer, which was different from his argument tone and his combat tone and his 3 in the morning kitchen tone. "First, don't antagonize Malfoy." "Who's Malfoy?" "Draco Malfoy. He's in our year, Slytherin. His father is. He's connected to Voldemort's old circle." A slight pause on the name, not from fear, from precision. "He'll try to get under your skin. Will he succeed?" Harry looked at him steadily. "Fair enough," Percy said. "I'll be polite." "I didn't say be polite, I said don't antagonize. That's the same thing. It's really not with Malfoy." Harry sat back. "Second, Dumbledore is going to be interested in you, not in a threatening way, in a collecting interesting things way. Just don't tell him more than you need to. Because Dumbledore knows things before you think he does, and the more you give him to work with, the more he works with. He's not an enemy, he's just—" Harry paused, looking for the word. "Playing a long game," Percy offered. "Always third, Hermione and Ron, they're my best friends. I know, you've told me about them. I'm telling you again because you have a habit of immediately rearranging the social dynamics of any group you enter, and these are my friends and I'd like them to remain intact as people." Percy blinked. "I rearrange social dynamics." Harry gave him a look that could have been framed and sold as art. "I'm very easy to get along with," Percy said. "You took over our training sessions within 3 weeks of arriving. You reorganized Sirius's entire kitchen system in one afternoon. You convinced Remus Lupin, who is famously careful, to teach you a modified version of the Patronus charm in 40 minutes by arguing with him about the underlying theory until he started arguing back and lost track of the fact that he'd decided not to. All of those things were improvements. That's not the point. What's the point?" "The point," Harry said with the patience of a person who has made his peace with something, "is that you have energy that other people tend to orbit. Just let Hermione and Ron find their own orbit. Yeah, don't drag them into yours before they've chosen it." Percy considered this seriously. It was a fair characterization and he knew it, and the fact that Harry could say it directly without making it a criticism was one of approximately 50 things he valued about having Harry as a brother. "Okay," he said, "I'll follow your lead. That'll be a first. I follow your lead in combat. You adapted my lead in combat. There's a difference." "Favorable difference? For you." The compartment door slid open. 3 people stood in the corridor, a girl with a large quantity of bushy brown hair carrying a cat carrier with a distinctive and enormous orange cat inside it, a tall red-haired boy who was eating something, and slightly behind them a smaller girl with the air of someone who was here by association and not entirely sure how she felt about it. "We couldn't find a free compartment," the bushy-haired girl said, and then she saw Percy, and the organized sentence she'd been building clearly ran into something it hadn't accounted for. "Oh, Harry, you didn't say you were bringing someone." "This is Percy," Harry said. "He's living with me in Sirius." The red-haired boy swallowed his food. "You're the one who's going to Hogwarts. Mum heard about it from Dad. He works at the ministry, and apparently there's been a lot of, well, it caused quite a thing. A demigod at Hogwarts. He said the paperwork alone." "Ron," Harry said. "Right, sorry, I'm Ron Weasley. Percy Jackson." Ron stuck out a hand. Percy shook it. Ron's grip was good, comfortable, direct, not performing anything. Percy liked him immediately in the way you like someone who took up exactly the amount of space they needed and no more. "Hermione Granger," the girl said, and shook his hand next with the precision of someone for whom introductions were a logistical step to be completed efficiently before the real conversation could begin. "I've read about Greek demigods. The accounts are mostly Roman era, so there's significant filtering through a Latin mythology lens, but the core structure—" "Hermione," Harry said. "I'm just saying I've done background reading." "Of course you have," Percy said, and he was genuinely pleased, because someone who'd done background reading was someone who was going to ask good questions rather than stare at him. "What's the primary source you'd recommend? Because most of what gets into books is either wrong or incomplete, but some of it is less wrong than others." Hermione's expression shifted into the specific brightness of a person whose intellectual spark has been struck. "Apollodorus is the most structurally rigorous, but Dorleas is better for—" She stopped, tilted her head. "You know the source material. It's my life, hard not to." "Right." She sat down, directing the cat carrier to the seat beside her with the manner of someone settling a very demanding colleague. "That makes sense." Ron had already sat down next to Harry and was pulling more food out of his bag with the easy comfort of someone who has decided this compartment is now his compartment, which Percy respected. The smaller girl had slipped into the remaining seat by the window without quite introducing herself. "Ginny," she said when Percy looked at her. "Ron's sister. You okay with the crowd?" "I've grown up with 6 brothers," she said. "A crowd is what peace looks like." Percy laughed. She smiled, quick, bright, unperformed. He had the distinct impression she was smarter than she let on in groups, which was an interesting quality in a 12-year-old and probably served her well. The train moved north through the changing landscape, London giving way to Midlands, Midlands to the broader green of further north, and the compartment fell into the easy rhythm of people finding their conversational footing. Hermione asked Percy questions about demigod abilities with the systematic thoroughness of someone building a complete mental taxonomy. Ron ate steadily and offered observations that were less academic and more practical, the kind of questions that came from genuine curiosity rather than research. Harry leaned back in his corner and watched Percy navigate it all with what Percy could feel without looking directly at him was a kind of quiet satisfaction. It was working. Percy was letting them find their own approach. He was answering, not performing. It was fine. It was more than fine. Then the compartment door opened again and everything took a sharp left turn. Draco Malfoy was exactly what Percy had expected from Harry's description, which was to say he was tall, pale, well-dressed in a way that meant to communicate something, and carrying himself with the specific confidence of someone who has always had people arrange themselves around him and has mistaken this for a natural law of physics. He had 2 large companions filling the doorway behind him. He looked at Harry, then at Ron, then at Percy. "Potter," he said, "new term. And you've already acquired another stray." Percy had been told not to antagonize Malfoy. He'd agreed not to antagonize Malfoy. The agreement remained technically in force. What Percy said in the tone he used for large monsters who had mistaken his patience for weakness was, "Hi." Malfoy's gaze moved over him with the evaluative quality of someone who has spent his entire life sorting people into categories. "You're the American, the demigod." He said the last word with the specific inflection of someone testing whether it was an insult. "Percy Jackson," Percy said. "I know who you are. My father made a number of inquiries." Malfoy stepped into the compartment's doorway fully, which was a territorial gesture Percy recognized because he'd encountered it in a dozen different forms from a dozen different people who all had the same idea about how space worked. "The Ministry is quite concerned about allowing a precise and deliberate, non-magical entity into Hogwarts on a permanent basis." "Non-magical," Percy repeated pleasantly. "You don't use a wand, you're not trained, you're not strictly speaking a wizard." "That's true," Percy said. "I'm something else entirely." "Which is exactly the concern." Malfoy smiled. It was a practiced smile, but Percy had met Ares, and Ares had a smile that would strip paint, and by comparison Malfoy's was slightly charming in the way that something small is charming when it doesn't realize what else is in the room. "My father has contacts who suggest that having a child of one of the Olympian gods in Hogwarts is a liability, that those beings have agendas." "Your father's right," Percy said. "My dad has agendas, most of them involve the sea. I'm not sure Hogwarts has enough of a coastline to worry about." Something shifted in Malfoy's expression. He'd expected defensiveness or deference, or at minimum the slightly ruffled response of someone who cares about their legitimacy being questioned. Percy had given him none of those, which left him with nothing to push against, and he was smart enough to recognize it. He looked at Harry instead. The Ministry will be watching this year, Potter, especially with Black out. A convicted criminal raising two, exonerated, Harry said. Not convicted, his exoneration was documented. Page 7 of the Prophet last spring. I have the clipping if you'd like it. That one landed. Malfoy's jaw tightened very slightly. Third year's going to be interesting, Percy said, still in the same pleasant tone. New class, new people, new everything. I'm genuinely excited. Malfoy looked at him for a moment longer. Whatever he'd come into the compartment to accomplish hadn't happened, and his recalibration time was good. He was fast. Percy gave him that. He stepped back. Welcome to Hogwarts, he said with the performative graciousness of someone filing a grievance with a smile. Try not to break anything. He left. His companions followed. The compartment door slid shut. Ron let out a long breath. Blimey. Hermione was looking at Percy with an expression that had moved from evaluative to frankly curious. You didn't rise to it at all. Why would I? Percy said. He wasn't saying anything interesting. He insulted Sirius. He implied something that wasn't correct. Harry corrected it. Conversation over. Percy looked at Harry, who was studying him with the look that meant he was assessing strategy. Was that okay? Better than okay, Harry said. That'll drive him insane. He needs the reaction. I know. How do you know? Because he came in here specifically to get one. Percy stretched out his legs. He's not stupid. He's just been allowed to operate without anyone declining to play along. Ginny was looking at Percy with the bright-eyed attention of someone cataloguing something for later use. She didn't say anything. She just turned back to the window, but the corner of her mouth was up. The trolley which arrived, and Percy bought enough food to sustain a small expedition, because he didn't know when he'd next have access to a reliable supply, and the son of Poseidon had not survived several near-death experiences to show up at Hogwarts underfueled. Ron's eyes went wide at the quantity. Harry shook his head with the fond exasperation of a person who has watched this behavior many times. Hermione made a small note in a pocket journal. What are you writing? Percy asked. Observations, Hermione said. I keep a journal of, well, new things. I started it first year. What do you write about me? She looked up. I haven't yet. I'm still gathering data. Fair, Percy said, and meant it. The rest of the journey north passed in the particular way that good journeys do, which is to say without being noticed until it was nearly over. The light outside changed, afternoon thinning into early evening, the landscape becoming wilder, Scotland coming up in its specific dramatic way, all dark hills and late light. Hermione read, Ron and Harry played chess. Percy and Ginny had a low-voiced conversation about the finer points of Quidditch strategy that revealed fairly quickly that Ginny had opinions about Quidditch that were both extensive and technically sophisticated, and that she was annoyed about not being allowed to try out for the Gryffindor team in a way she hadn't quite said out loud to anyone. You should try out, Percy said. I'm a second year. The team doesn't usually take second years because they're not usually good enough. Good enough? She looked at him. Yes, then the rule doesn't apply to you. She went quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, processing quiet. Harry's the seeker. He's not going to go to bat for his little sister's friend getting on the team. Have you asked him? No. Then how do you know how he'd respond? Another quiet. Longer this time. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm saying. Harry glanced over from the chess game. Percy kept his expression neutral. Harry narrowed his eyes fractionally and went back to the chess game, which he was losing to Ron in a way that suggested Ron at chess was operating at a genuinely different altitude than Ron in most other contexts. At 7:30 the train began to slow, and the announcement came through, and everyone changed into robes in the narrow compartment with the organizational chaos this inevitably produced. Percy's robes were new, bought in Diagon Alley the week before from a shop that had treated him with the polite wariness of people who had heard about him through unofficial channels and didn't quite know how to price something for a demigod. He'd ended up with good robes. He'd also ended up with the Hogwarts crest on the breast pocket, which Sirius had arranged somehow, which Percy hadn't asked about because some administrative victories were best accepted without examination. The station at Hogsmeade was dark and cool and damp in the specific Highland way, the kind of damp that was more a climate than a weather event. Percy stepped off the train and felt immediately the water beneath the ground, not just groundwater, deeper, old, the kind of underground waterways that had been running since before anyone built anything above them, connected in long, slow chains to rivers and eventually the sea. He stood very still for a moment. You all right? Harry said, stepping off behind him. There's water under the school, Percy said. There's the lake, we'll see it in a minute. No, deeper, old channels, ancient. He looked at the dark shapes of the mountains against the grey sky. This place is built on something. Most old places are, Harry said. Then, after a moment, is it threatening? No, Percy shook his head slowly. Just old, like it's been there long enough to forget why it started moving. He came back to himself. The lake is that direction? How can you tell? I can always tell. They walked up the path toward the carriages, and Percy caught his first sight of Hogwarts properly, not in pictures, not from Sirius's descriptions, not from Harry's accounts late at night when he was in the mood to talk about it. Castle itself, rising against the dark sky above the grounds, lit from within, its towers catching the last of the light and the first of the dark in equal measure. reflected in the lake below it in a long, shimmering double. Percy had seen Olympus. This was different, older in a different way, not divine exactly, but saturated with human belief over centuries, which was its own kind of power. The kind that built up slowly in places where people had cared about something for a very long time. "It's something, isn't it?" Ron said, appearing beside him. "Yeah," Percy said, "it is." They took the carriages up to the school, pulled by the straws that Percy could see clearly and didn't bother mentioning because visible death didn't require commentary. Hermione sat across from him in the carriage and followed his gaze to the harness moving apparently on its own and said quietly, "You can see them, the straws, yeah, you have to have seen, yeah." He held her gaze. "I know." He nodded once and didn't pursue it, and he appreciated that more than he would have appreciated almost anything else she could have done. The great hall hit Percy like a sound hitting water expansively in all directions at once. The enchanted ceiling was overcast and starless, matching the real sky outside, and the candles floated in long drifting rows, and the 4 long tables were full of students in robes, and the noise was layered and complex and alive. Percy had been in large spaces before. He had never been in a space that felt inhabited like this, the specific warmth of a place that had been used intensely by people who loved it for a very long time. He followed Harry to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and the looks he got were of the specific variety reserved for novelties. Curious, slightly guarded, wanting to assess before committing to an opinion. He didn't try to manage it. He sat down, reached for the water jug because crossing Scotland had made him thirsty, and poured himself a glass. The water moved with him. It was almost imperceptible, just the slight sureness of it, the way the pour went exactly where he wanted without any conscious direction. A second-year girl sitting across from him stared. Percy drank his water. The sorting ceremony ran through the new first years with the smooth efficiency of a system that knew exactly what it was doing. Percy watched the hat and found himself genuinely curious about it. A sorting hat was not a Greek concept in any meaningful way, and the idea of an artifact that contained intelligence and judgment was interesting enough that he spent most of the sorting working out what the Greek equivalent would be, which took him down a mythological rabbit hole that he surfaced from just in time to notice the whole hall going quieter. Professor McGonagall, standing at the front with a parchment in hand, looked out at the assembled students with the expression of a woman who has decided to say something and is choosing her words precisely. "This year," she said, "Hogwarts is host to a small number of transfer students as part of Dumbledore's inter-school exchange initiative. These students have been assessed for enrollment and placed according to their abilities and year equivalents. I will now call them forward for their sorting." A pause. "Percy Jackson." Percy stood up. Around the hall, the noise that had been lowering went quieter still. He could feel every set of eyes. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was just a lot of attention, and Percy had learned that the best thing to do with a lot of attention was to walk through it rather than shrink from it. He walked up to the stool. Up close, the sorting hat was old and patched and slightly lopsided, and it radiated the specific presence of something that has been paying very close attention for a very long time. Percy sat on the stool. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. It went dark. "Well," said a voice inside his skull, dry as an old library, "this is new." "Hi," Percy said internally. "Son of Poseidon, 13th generation of divine inheritance." That's the hat paused, and Percy had the distinct impression it was recalibrating something. "I've never done this before. First time for everything." "Indeed." A pause that felt like deep consideration. "You don't have magic in the way my students do. What you have is older, more direct, less structured." Another pause. "But structure isn't my primary concern. I look at who a person is, what they value, where they fight best." A long beat. "You're loyal to the point of absurdity." "I prefer committed. You fight better when other people's safety is at stake than when your own is." "Most people do. Most people don't fight in Pausai with a ballpoint pen. My sword has a ballpoint pen form factor. It's very practical." The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh in a very old and dry accent. "Gryffindor." The hat shouted the last word into the hall, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Percy stood up and walked back, and when he arrived at the table, Harry was grinning, not the small quiet grin, the full one which Percy had seen approximately 6 times and valued accordingly. He sat down. "Gryffindor," Ron said. "Brilliant, absolutely right." "Was there another option?" Percy asked. "I thought maybe Slytherin," Hermione said thoughtfully. "Resourcefulness, ambition, the capacity for—" "Hermione," Ron said, "I'm just doing an analysis." "He's sitting right there." "I take it as a compliment," Percy said. "The hat said I was loyal to the point of absurdity, which is basically being called dumb by a hat, but I'll take Gryffindor." The other transfer students, 2 of them, a grave-faced girl from Beauxbatons named Celeste who was sorted into Ravenclaw without visible stress, and a boy from Durmstrang named Oscar who ended up in Hufflepuff and looked like he'd been expecting something different, came through in short order. Then Dumbledore rose, and the hall went quiet in the specific way it went quiet for him, not the sharp silence of authority but the attentive silence of people who have learned to listen. "Welcome," he said, "to another year at Hogwarts. To our new students, permanent and temporary alike, I extend the warmest welcome this old castle has to offer, which is warmer than it might appear." A smile moved through his beard. "This year will see several new additions to our curriculum and our community. I ask only that you approach novelty, as you approach all things at Hogwarts, with curiosity and generosity." He paused. "Now, the usual reminders: the Forbidden Forest remains forbidden. Mr. Filch's list of prohibited items has been updated and is now longer than I am tall. And the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is—" Another pause, this one with a thread of something underneath it. "Perfectly accessible this year, which is a welcome change." The feast appeared. Percy ate with the focused attention of someone who had been on the train for 8 hours and made a tactical miscalculation with the emergency biscuits. Harry and Ron flanked him and conducted a running commentary on the various members of the Gryffindor table, which Percy absorbed and filed. Hermione engaged him in a detailed and genuinely interesting conversation about the theoretical relationship between divine power and wand-channeled magic, which she had apparently been constructing in outline form since the carriage ride up, and was now deploying with the organized enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting for the appropriate moment. "The core of wand magic is intention focused through a specific medium," she said, gesturing with her fork. "The wand cores have sympathetic resonance with particular magical affinities. Dragon heartstring, unicorn hair, phoenix feather, all different. And mine isn't any of those," Percy said. "Right, you're not channeling through a medium. You're, as far as I can understand from what I've read, expressing something inherent. Like the difference between a radio transmitter and someone who is just already radiating." "That's a good way to put it," Percy said. "Can you affect water anywhere, just in your proximity? Range extends with practice, proximity is just more precise. Could you affect the water in someone's body?" She said it with pure scientific curiosity, no guile, her eyes bright with genuine inquiry. Percy had been asked versions of this question before, usually by people trying to establish how dangerous he was. From Hermione, it felt like it came from the same place as "could you affect clouds or does salinity matter?" "In theory," he said. "In practice, there are things I can do and things I choose not to do, because I decide what I am, not what I can." Hermione stared at him for a moment, then she wrote something in her pocket journal. "You're writing about me," Percy said. "You said a lot of things that were interesting." Harry leaned over from across the table. "That's the highest compliment she gives." "I give lots of compliments," Hermione said without looking up. "Name one," Ron said. "You're an excellent chess player." "That's one." "You're also very good at finishing food before anyone else notices." "That's less of a compliment." After the feast, Dumbledore's final announcements included 2 things of note: that Professor Lupin had been appointed Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Harry's expression at this was quietly pleased, and Percy filed it, and that there would be a new approach to certain restricted areas of the castle, which Dumbledore described as being related to a security upgrade in terms that were polite and uninformative. They moved toward Gryffindor Tower through the castle corridors, and Percy let himself slow his attention down and take it in properly. The moving portraits, the staircases that shifted, the suits of armor that tracked you with their helmet visors, the torches that burned without source, the sheer accumulated age of the stones. He had a sense, strong and clear, that this place was layered, that the thing Hogwarts showed students was its uppermost layer, and that below that, in the places where the old water ran through the dark channels he'd felt from the station, there was something else entirely. Something that hadn't moved or spoken in a very long time. Something that had noticed he'd arrived. He didn't say anything about it. He filed it the way he filed all true important things, precisely, without urgency, to be dealt with when the time was right. Gryffindor Tower, when they arrived, was everything Harry had described and better in person. The warm red and gold of the common room, the fire already going, the battered comfortable furniture that bore the marks of 10 years of students having a specific kind of fun. Percy looked around and felt the same thing he'd felt in the Edinburgh kitchen on a Tuesday morning, which was the precise recognition of a place where it was possible to be easy. Harry stood beside him at the entrance while the other students moved past. "Well," Harry said. Percy looked at the fire, at the portrait hole swinging shut behind the last first year, at the ancient windows with its crooked cushion, at the stone wall where someone had carved their initials into the mortar, very small in about 17 places. "I think," Percy said, "we should find out what's in the water channels under the school." Harry stared at him. "Tomorrow," Percy added. Obviously." Harry shook his head with the deep, resigned affection of someone who has accepted, fully and without remaining ambiguity, exactly who his brother is. "Come on." Ron was already up the stairs, and he's going to claim the best bed if we don't. Percy was already moving. Chapter 3. The Sea Underneath Hogwarts. The first week of term established several things quickly. Percy was terrible at charms, adequate at transfiguration, genuinely dangerous in herbology in ways that Professor Sprout found alternately alarming and useful, and extraordinary at defense against the dark arts in a manner that made Professor Lupin go very quiet during their first practical session, and then write something in his notes with the focused intensity of a man revising a previous assumption. He also had no wand, which created a recurring administrative problem that the school had apparently not fully anticipated despite Dumbledore's months of preparation. Every class that required wand work had to be adjusted to account for the fact that Percy's participation looked entirely different from everyone else's. Flitwick, who had done Percy's assessment on the first day and spent the entire 40 minutes in a state of barely contained academic excitement, had declared him functionally equivalent to a sixth year in terms of raw magical expression, but operating on a completely foreign system, which Percy thought was a generous framing of this student cannot do any of the homework. The compromise they'd arrived at was practical. Percy attended all standard classes and completed the theoretical components fully. In practical sessions, he demonstrated equivalence where possible, and in cases where no equivalent existed, he sat with Hermione and did the reading, which Hermione made clear was not a hardship for her. "You're actually very good at the theory," she told him on Wednesday during a charm study session in the common room. "Your understanding of intent as a functional element is better than most third years. Intent is how everything works where I'm from," Percy said. "You have to mean it. The water knows when you don't. The water knows, not like thinking knows, like it responds to truth. If you're afraid of what you're doing, it knows. If you're distracted, it knows. It's less about skill and more about being genuinely present in what you're doing." Hermione wrote this down. She'd been writing things down in her pocket journal since the feast and showed no signs of stopping, which Percy had decided to take as a compliment in the same spirit as Harry had described it. Ron, looking up from his transfiguration essay across the table, said, "Does it work the other way? Like if you're really confident, does it do more?" "Yeah," Percy said, "but confidence isn't the same as arrogance. Arrogance reads the same as fear to water. Both of them are about being in your head instead of in what you're doing." Ron chewed the end of his quill. "That's dead interesting actually. You should tell Professor Lupin that." "I did," Percy said. Hermione looked up sharply. "When, after class on Monday, we had a conversation about how different magical systems use intent as a functional mechanism. He had a lot to say about dark creatures and their response to conviction versus performance. He talked to you after class." Hermione sounded genuinely caught off guard. "I tried to ask him about the course structure and he said we'd cover it in the syllabus." "I didn't ask about course structure," Percy shrugged. "He mentioned boggarts and I said that where I was from, the closest equivalent was an eidolon and that dealing with them was similar in principle. You had to know who you were clearly enough that the reflection couldn't get traction. He got interested in that." Hermione stared at him. "What?" Percy said. "You walked into the first week of defense and casually gave Lupin a cross-mythological comparison that's relevant to his curriculum. It came up naturally. Nothing comes up naturally like that. Most things do if you're actually paying attention." Hermione closed her journal and opened it again as though resetting. Ron caught Percy's eye over her head and mouthed, "She's like this about everything," which Percy had already gathered but appreciated confirmed. Harry was characteristically doing three things at once at the far end of the table, working on his own essay, listening to the conversation, and doing the specific thing he did where his eyes went slightly distant for a moment and then sharpened back like he was holding a thought in a separate window. Percy had asked him about it once. Harry had said he was just thinking. Percy had not pushed it because some thinking was private. "The channels," Harry said without looking up from his essay. Percy looked at him. "You've been thinking about it all week," Harry said. "I can tell because you keep going quiet when we're near the bathrooms." "The plumbing connects to the old channels," Percy said. "I'm trying to map the system. And the main channel runs northeast-southwest about 60 feet down. It's old, really old, like pre-Hogwarts old. The school is built over it on purpose." He paused. "Or maybe because of it." Hermione had put her quill down. Her attention had fully pivoted in the way that happened when something moved from interesting to genuinely important in her internal filing system. "Pre-Hogwarts? How pre? I don't know. Old enough that the stone around it is a different kind than the castle's foundation. Different era of construction. There are records in the library," Hermione said immediately. "Hogwarts, a history has a section on the groundwater management during the original construction." Helga Hufflepuff apparently insisted on, "Hermione," Ron said, "we should look at the geological records. It's 9 o'clock on a Wednesday. The library is open until 10. I have 15 lines left on this essay. I'll help with the essay. You'll redo the essay. I'll help with the essay." They ended up in the library at 9:30, all four of them, because Ron's essay had genuinely needed attention and Hermione's involvement had made it, in Ron's words, alarmingly better, which had put him in a good mood. The library was quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that old libraries held specifically, slightly different from regular silence, full of something that wasn't quite presence. Hermione went directly for the historical records section with the confidence of someone who has memorized a filing system. Percy moved more slowly, feeling the shift in the ambient water. There was less free water at this end of the library. The stone was older and drier, but the channel below was closer here. He could feel it running beneath the floor like a bass note under music. "Here," Hermione said, pulling a heavy book from a low shelf. "Not Hogwarts. A history, something older with a cracked spine and faded title. Foundations, a record of the four founders' construction and its underlying natural architecture. Vol. II." They spread it across a library table and Hermione began reading with the focused efficiency of a search algorithm, her finger moving down the page. Ron leaned over her shoulder. Harry sat across from Percy and looked at him. "How close is it?" Harry said quietly. The main channel, maybe 50 feet down. Percy put his hand flat on the table. He could do it without the gesture, but the contact helped him focus the detail. It's big, not a creek, more like an underground river. Does it connect to the lake? Yeah, the lake feeds into it from the east, and the lake. Percy stopped. What? The lake has something in it, something big and old. The giant squid, Harry said. I know about the squid, this is different. Percy kept his hand flat on the table. This is in the deep part, not swimming around the surface, deep in the cold water, completely still. He looked at Harry. Whatever it is, it's not aggressive, it's just waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know, but it noticed me the same night I noticed it, from the train station. Harry held his gaze. Is that a problem? Not right now. Percy lifted his hand. But it's something we need to know more about. Hermione made a sound, the sharp exhale of someone who has found the thing they were looking for. Listen to this. She read aloud, her voice dropping to the library's appropriate register. The site chosen by the founders was selected not solely for its remote location or its natural defensive advantages, but for its position above one of the three great undercurrents, ancient waterways held in pre-Roman tradition to be the veins of the earth itself. Founder Slytherin recorded considerable interest in these channels, believing them to hold residual power from an earlier civilization he termed the predecessors. Founder Hufflepuff, whose affinity for natural magic was among the strongest of the four, reportedly maintained direct communication with the entity she called the Deep Warden, which she described as a guardian placed in the water before memory by hands now forgotten. The library was very quiet. Deep Warden, Percy said. That's what it says, and Hufflepuff talked to it. According to this, Hermione looked up. Percy, the thing you're sensing in the lake might be a 1,000-year-old guardian entity, yeah. Is that dangerous? Percy thought about what he'd felt, the stillness, the deep patience, the quality of waiting that wasn't predatory but wasn't benign either. It was the quality of something that had been given a purpose so long ago that the purpose was now the entirety of its identity. He knew that feeling from things he'd encountered in the deep ocean, the places his father's domain touched the oldest parts of the world. It depends what it's guarding, he said. Ron had been reading over Hermione's shoulder and had gone slightly pale, which for a Weasley meant something because they tended to run high color. There's more, he said. Bottom of the page. Hermione read, Salazar Slytherin's final disagreement with the other founders was not, as commonly recorded, solely about the admission of Muggle-born students. His private correspondence held in the restricted section indicates a secondary dispute about the great undercurrent and what he described as the thing sleeping in it, which should not be woken by the wrong bloodline at the wrong time. That's not ominous at all, Harry said. He thought the right bloodline could wake it up, Percy said slowly. Wake it up or communicate with it, and he didn't want the wrong people having access to it. Which is very on brand for Slytherin, Ron muttered. But here's the thing, Percy said. The Deep Warden already noticed me. It didn't react badly, it just looked. He met Hermione's eyes. Hufflepuff could talk to it. Slytherin was afraid of the wrong person talking to it. I'm a child of Poseidon, and it looked at me the way the sea looks at me. Like it recognizes you, Hermione said. Like it knows what I am and is deciding whether that matters. Harry leaned back in his chair. His expression had the quality it got during combat planning, the specific stillness of someone organizing information into priority order. We have an ancient guardian entity in the lake, possibly connected to Slytherin's reason for leaving Hogwarts, definitely connected to the underground water system, and Percy can potentially talk to it. Potentially, Percy said. You're going to go in the lake, Harry said. Not tonight, Percy said, but eventually, obviously. Ron closed the book. I want to go on record saying that this is the most interesting third year I could have imagined, and also that I'd like to live to see fourth year. You'll be fine, Percy said. The warden isn't interested in you. That makes it better and worse simultaneously. They stayed in the library until Madame Pince rounded the corner with the specific expression of a librarian who has been lenient for too long and is now correcting course, and they gathered their things and moved back toward Gryffindor Tower through the quiet corridors, their footsteps echoing in the particular night castle way that felt like moving through something that was listening. The corridor junction before the tower staircase, Percy stopped. The others stopped. What? Harry said. There's someone in the corridor ahead. Percy said it quietly. Standing still. They've been standing still for a few minutes. Filch. Percy shook his head. Not the right weight distribution. Filch walks with one leg slightly shorter from an old injury. This is someone standing still deliberately, he considered. They're not breathing fast. They're not nervous. They're waiting. Hermione had her wand out. Ron had his. Harry had his, and the quality of his attention had shifted to the particular focused readiness that Percy associated with someone who had been in real danger before and recognized the specific register of it. Can you? Harry started. Percy was already moving. Not forward, sideways. He stepped into the alcove on the right and pulled himself against the wall and felt through the stone for the nearest water source, which was a jug of drinking water in a classroom 2 doors down. He pulled it toward the corridor junction at the far end of the hall, where he could hear, now that he was listening for it specifically, the slow, deliberate breathing of someone standing in shadows. The water moved around the corner of the far junction, not visible, just flowing in the gap between the stone floor and the wall, a thin spreading line reaching toward the standing figure. Contact. He felt it, the soles of shoes, dry, expensive leather, 2 feet, stillness. And then unmistakably the specific cold sensation of something wrapped around the person's left forearm that was neither water nor stone nor cloth. A channel of power running through it that moved wrong, too straight, too sharp, like a cut rather than a flow. He stepped back into the corridor. Dark magic, he said. In the forearm, old mark. Hermione's face changed. Harry's changed differently. Death Eater, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Here, in Hogwarts, Ron whispered. Not a student, Percy said. Wrong height, wrong body mass. He thought. Adult, slight build, standing too carefully to be casual. Staff, Hermione said. There's a new. She stopped. The substitute for Binns next Tuesday. Someone asked about it at the Gryffindor table, a visiting lecturer. Name, Percy said. I don't know. It was a background conversation. I wasn't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I don't know. They moved. Not retreat. Harry made the decision without announcing it, turning toward the far corridor, and Percy understood and went left while Harry went right, flanking the junction. Ron and Hermione stayed at the intersection to provide the visual center point. It was not a plan they discussed. It was what 8 months of training together looked like when it mattered. Percy came around the far end of the hall from the west. Harry came around from the east. The corridor was empty. Percy stood in the dark space where the figure had been standing. The stone was cold. The water he'd sent around was pooling slowly on the floor, purposeless now. He crouched and felt the stone still warm very slightly from contact. Recent. They went, he said, straightening. Harry was looking at the wall beside him. There's a passage. He put his hand on a specific stone and pressed, and the wall gave a hidden panel, no visible seam, swinging inward on a dark space. How did you know? Percy said. Spent a lot of time with the marauders. Harry stopped. Long story, but there are passages all through the castle, and someone who knew them well enough to use them in the dark was waiting for us specifically. Or waiting for me, Percy said. I was the one moving differently, walking closer to the walls. Why, better connection to the underground water. I can feel it better through the stone than through air. He looked at the passage. They were watching me. The certainty settled into him with the specific weight of true things. Whatever was in the passage network of Hogwarts, whatever adult with a dark mark on their arm had been standing still enough in the dark to wait without fidgeting, it had been watching him specifically. Not Harry, him. He thought about Sirius's letter sitting in his trunk upstairs. Something disturbed the impulsi on the Long Island Sound. I don't know what yet. He thought about the identical line in 2 prophecies. He thought about Chiron writing the western borders with the specific carefulness of someone being precise about direction. We should tell Lupin, Harry said. In the morning, Percy said. Tonight we should be visible in the tower and sleep normally. You want to appear unaware. I want to appear unaware, Percy confirmed. Let whoever that was think they weren't noticed. You don't think it's that simple. I think nothing is that simple. But starting from appearing unaware is better than appearing aware, because if they know we know, they adjust their approach. Right now we have information they don't know we have. Harry nodded. Ron, who had arrived at the passage with Hermione, had gone from pale to determined pink, which was his natural color when he'd decided something was happening and he was going to be part of how it was handled. Lupin in the morning, Harry said. Lupin in the morning, Percy agreed. They went back to the tower, through the portrait hole, into the warm common room that was empty now, the fire down to embers, the comfortable furniture holding the warm shapes of the evening. Percy sat for a moment by the fire and felt through the floor, the castle, the water, the deep pulse of the channels running 60 feet down, and at the far end of the web in the cold deep of the lake, the still, ancient thing that had been waiting for longer than the school above it. It still wasn't threatening. But it was paying more attention than it had been. He went to bed and lay awake for a while, listening to the castle, which had its own breathing at night, the settlings and sighings of very old stone, the particular cadence of a place that doesn't entirely sleep. Then he did sleep, and the water in the lake held its stillness, and whatever waited in it waited on. The defense against the dark arts classroom was on the 3rd floor, and it was, as of this year, Professor Lupin's territory in every visible way, bookshelves lining the walls, several interesting objects sitting on various surfaces in ways that were clearly both decorative and potentially instructional, and a general atmosphere of taken seriously without being made frightening, which Percy thought was a reasonable approach to a subject like this. They arrived Tuesday morning, found seats, and Percy noticed immediately that something was different. There was a second person at the front of the room, not Lupin, a man Percy hadn't seen before, sitting at the side chair with the stillness of someone who'd been in rooms like this before and was comfortable in them. He was perhaps 45, with sharp, dark features and a quality of self-containment that read as experience more than personality. A visitor, Hermione said quietly. This must be the substitute lecturer. Lupin arrived exactly on time, set his briefcase on the desk and said, "Good morning. Before we continue our work on defensive responses to dark creatures, I've invited a visiting specialist to observe today's practical session." He indicated the man at the side. "Professor Harkin has experience in cross-magical defense. He's here as an observer only." Percy looked at Professor Harkin. Professor Harkin looked at Percy. It was a brief look, calibrated, professional, completely appropriate. It lasted perhaps a second and a half longer than a casual glance. Percy filed it, said nothing, opened his notebook. The lesson was on boggarts, which Lupin had teased in the first week. The wardrobe at the back of the class held one that had been captured near Hogsmeade. And Lupin walked them through the mechanics, the creature's reliance on the subject's fear, the ridiculous charm's function as a reframing mechanism, the importance of having a clear and genuine countermeasure before approaching. The key, Lupin said, is authenticity. A forced laugh won't work. A performed fear response won't give the boggart what it needs to maintain form. Both the fear and the counter must be real. He looked around the room. Who would like to go first? Neville Longbottom, who Percy had decided was one of the more underestimated people in Gryffindor, volunteered with a particular kind of courage that wasn't the loud kind but wasn't nothing. His boggart became Snape. The class laughed. Lupin's expression was carefully neutral. They went through in order. Ron's boggart became a spider. Harry's, Percy watched this one carefully, became a Dementor, which the boggart converted into with unusual accuracy. And Harry's ridiculous produced a deflating balloon that the class found funny, and Harry sat back down with an expression that was steadier than Percy expected. "You're fine," Percy said without looking at him. "I know," Harry said quietly. Percy's turn. He walked to the front and the wardrobe opened and the boggart stepped out and looked at him. It looked at him for a long time. This was unusual. Normally boggarts moved fast, they read the fear and became it. Percy waited, watching the thing with the same steady attention he gave to things that were trying to figure him out. "It's having trouble," Lupin said very quietly from behind him. "I noticed," Percy said. The boggart shifted, tried something, dissolved, tried again. It went through 3 different forms quickly, the ocean in darkness, without light, vast and indifferent. Then his mother's face, but wrong, with the specific wrongness of something that has read the concept of her from his fear of losing her but doesn't know her. Then, and this one was more accurate, which meant it was better at reading him than he'd credited, Sirius still, with the specific stillness of someone who is no longer alive. Percy said, "Ridiculous," flatly, and he didn't use the one that he didn't have, he used the intent, which was the same as wand magic in structure if not in mechanism. And the boggart felt it and the Sirius image went briefly, absurdly, into a Hawaiian shirt and a ridiculous sun hat, and the class laughed. The boggart retreated into the wardrobe. Percy walked back to his seat and became aware, sitting down, that Professor Harkin had stood up from his chair at the side of the room at some point during the boggart session and had not sat back down. "That was non-wand," Harkin said. He was addressing Lupin, not Percy, but the observation was clearly about Percy. "Mr. Jackson doesn't use a wand," Lupin said. "His abilities are—" "I know what his abilities are," still not addressing Percy. "I'm noting that his intent projection was functional on a boggart, which is not a material creature. The charm requires wand mediation to, apparently not universally," Lupin said with the mild tone of someone who has said something pointed and is allowing it to land without emphasis. "May I?" Harkin said, and this time he turned to Percy directly. He had a pleasant professional manner, a scholar's face, steady eyes. "Mr. Jackson, the intent you used just then, was that a trained response or an instinctive one?" "Both," Percy said. "I learned the theory from my godfather, the expression is mine. And the training, where did it take place?" "Various places. Camp Half-Blood." Percy's expression didn't change. He held Harkin's gaze steadily and said, "Among other places. I've read some accounts of the training methodology there, quite interesting, particularly the water affinity exercises." Harkin turned away professionally back to Lupin. "Remarkable display, thank you." He sat back down. Percy looked at the back of Harkin's head. He looked at the left forearm, which was covered by a jacket sleeve. He thought about expensive leather soles on cold stone in a dark corridor. He thought, there it is. He didn't look at Harry. He didn't need to. He could feel, in the peripheral way you feel the movement of people you know very well, Harry going very still 2 seats to his left. After class, they were last out the door. Lupin was erasing the board. Percy walked to the front of the room and waited. Lupin turned. He read Percy's expression and said, "Close the door." Harry closed the door. "Harkin," Percy said, "where did you find him?" Lupin set down his eraser. "He was recommended by a ministry contact. The exchange program brought in several visiting lecturers. He has credentials, genuine ones. He's a published scholar in cross-magical defense theory. He was in the corridor near the tower last night," Percy said, "watching me." Lupin was very still. "You're certain?" "I felt the mark on his arm through the stone." Percy said it plainly. "Old magic, wrong kind, set into the flesh, same as a Death Eater mark," Lupin said quietly. "You can feel it." "I can feel anything with water in it. The dark marks have a specific signature. Old dark binding creates a residue that holds like rust. It doesn't go away." He paused. "He's not active. The mark isn't responding to anyone right now, but it's there." Lupin sat down on the edge of his desk and looked at the floor for a moment. Percy let him think. Harry leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and said nothing. "Dumbledore needs to know," Lupin said finally. "Yes," Percy said, "and something else." He looked at Lupin carefully. He asked about Camp Half-Blood specifically. He knew about the training methodology. He wasn't asking because he was curious. He was checking how much I'd learned and whether what I can do is consistent. "Consistent with what?" Lupin asked. "That's what I'd like to know." Lupin looked at him for a long moment, the evaluating look of someone who has spent a long time reading danger and is deciding how to categorize what's in front of him. Then he stood. "Come with me, both of you. We're going to see Dumbledore now." "We have transfiguration," Harry said. "Onigall will survive the context," Lupin said, and picked up his wand from the desk and moved to the door with the brisk certainty of someone who has made his decision and is done deliberating. They went up. Dumbledore's office was at the top of the moving staircase, and Percy had been here once since arriving, a brief visit in the first week, formal, introductory, during which Dumbledore had offered him a lemon drop and looked at him with exactly the attention Sirius had warned about. Now walking in on Lupin's momentum, the office felt different, charged, the way a room feels when the conversation that's about to happen in it is one that matters. Dumbledore was behind his desk. Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch, and he looked at Percy when Percy came in with the specific golden attention of a bird that operates at a level above most things in the room. Percy looked back at him with respect. Fawkes ruffled his feathers very slightly and turned back to the window. "Remus," Dumbledore said, "and our young Gryffindors, sit down please." They sat. Lupin delivered the summary with efficient precision. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk, his expression attentive without being reactive. When Lupin finished, Dumbledore looked at Percy. "You're certain about the mark?" Yes, and he knew about Camp Half-Blood. Specifically, not generally, he knew training methodology. That's not public information. No, Dumbledore agreed, it is not. He looked at the space between Percy and Harry. "And he was watching you specifically, not Harry." "I think," Percy said, "that whoever sent him thought Harry would be the variable this year. Another year, another adventure, something connected to Voldemort's return. They weren't expecting me." He paused. "Now they know I'm here and they're trying to assess what I can do." "Which suggests," Harry said, "that Voldemort's people and whoever is interested in Percy's world have started talking." Dumbledore's eyes moved to Harry with the specific quality of someone recalibrating an estimation. "You've reached the same conclusion I have," he said. "Sirius told us about the shared line in the prophecies," Harry said simply. "We've been thinking about it since September 1st. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should not have sat on that information as long as I did." "No," Percy said, "you shouldn't have." It was direct and flat and not unkind, and Dumbledore looked at him with something that was not quite surprise, more the acknowledgement of someone who has been gently corrected and found the correction accurate. "No," Dumbledore agreed, "you're right." He stood. "I will deal with Harkin today. He will not be here for his Tuesday session." He moved to the window, looking down at the grounds. The lake was visible from here, dark and smooth under the grey autumn sky. "Percy, the entity in the lake, what Hermione found in the Founder's records." Percy looked at him sharply. "You know about that? Madam Pince noted which volumes were accessed last night." A faint smile in the old voice. "I've known about the Deep Warden for a very long time. I have been waiting, patiently, perhaps too patiently, for the right moment to address it." He turned from the window. "I believe that moment may be arriving sooner than I'd planned." "What is it?" Percy asked. "The Warden." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The Phoenix turned back from the window and watched with golden patience. "I believe," Dumbledore said, "that it is a guardian placed in the water by Poseidon himself, a very long time ago, before Rome, before Greece as you know it, before the naming of most things." He paused. "It guards something beneath the lake, beneath the castle, in the deepest channel, something that Salazar Slytherin found and tried to control and ultimately left alone because he could not, something that has been sleeping because nothing with the right bloodline came close enough to wake it." The office was very quiet. "Until now," Harry said. "Until now," Dumbledore confirmed, and he was looking at Percy. Percy sat with this. He sat with the weight of it, the ancient water beneath the Scottish Highlands, the guardian placed there by his father before his father was known by that name, the centuries of waiting. He thought about the moment on the train platform when the first pulse of recognition had come through the stone. He wasn't afraid. He was genuinely, deeply, almost inconveniently curious. "I need to go in the lake," he said. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "I believe you do." "Not alone," Harry said immediately. Percy looked at him. "I mean it," Harry said. "Whatever is down there, you're not going alone. You breathe air, you breathe water, you drown." "Not if you," Harry stopped, reconsidered. "Can you do it, hold a bubble of air around another person underwater?" Percy thought about it. He'd never tried. The principle was straightforward, a sphere of water, behavior inverted, pressure managed, air pocket maintained. It was more complex than it sounded. "Probably," he said. "Good enough," Harry said. "That's not reassuring. It's as reassuring as the situation warrants." Lupin, who had been listening with the expression of a man watching two people negotiate a decision that has already been made and doesn't require his input, said, "When?" "Friday," Percy said. "Night, after the castle goes to sleep." Dumbledore nodded once. "I'll arrange it." Percy looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something old was waiting in the dark water beneath a Scottish lake, placed there by his father in an age that had no proper name, and Percy had the specific feeling of a current shifting, the moment before a wave commits to its direction, when everything is still possible and nothing is chosen yet. Friday felt very close. The week moved toward it with the specific momentum of a week that knows it's heading somewhere. Classes, meals, the common room, the library, all of it had a quality of marking time rather than existing for itself. Only training felt fully real, and Percy threw himself into it with the intensity he reserved for things that were about to matter. He worked specifically on sustained pressure control in open water, using the lake shallows near the edge of the grounds in early morning before anyone else was up, feeling the lake's response to his direction. The lake cooperated the way all bodies of water cooperated with him, not eagerly but honestly. It did what he asked and no more, which was the relationship he preferred. He was in the shallows on Thursday morning, waist-deep in genuinely cold Scottish loch water, hands spread at his sides, maintaining 3 simultaneous currents at different depths, when he became aware of someone standing on the bank. He turned. It was Ginny Weasley in her school robes, her red hair loose in the morning wind, watching him with the unsurprised expression of someone who had walked out to see something specific. "You're up early," Percy said. "So are you." She looked at the water around him. The currents he was running were visible as surface disturbances if you knew what you were looking at. "You're practicing for tomorrow." "How do you know about tomorrow?" Harry told Ron, and Ron doesn't have an indoor voice. Percy looked at the sky. "Right, can I help?" She said it matter-of-factly, sitting down on the bank with the comfortable ease of someone who had made themselves at home in outdoor spaces their entire life. "I'm not going to get in your way. I'm good at observation, and you might find it useful to have someone watching from outside while you work." Percy thought about this for a moment. He thought about what he'd said to her on the train about trying out for Quidditch, the directness, the refusal of the self-diminishment that she'd worn so casually. He thought about the way she'd sat in the compartment and listened and been smarter than her silence indicated. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, that's useful." She nodded. She pulled her knees up to her chest, looking at the lake. "What should I watch for?" "Whether the currents I'm running are visibly coherent at the surface. I can feel them from inside, but I can't see them from above." "The middle one's drifting left," she said. Immediately, Percy adjusted. Better. The right one is too shallow. I can see it pulling differently than the other two." "Too shallow by how much?" "Maybe 6 inches." He corrected the depth. Now they look the same from here." They worked like this for 40 minutes, Ginny on the bank providing the external perspective that Percy couldn't give himself, her descriptions specific and accurate, and entirely without the particular performance that came from people who wanted you to know how smart they were. She was just telling him what she saw. It was exactly what he needed. When he came out of the lake, water shedding from him with the automatic ease of his nature, it never clung the way it would to anyone else, just fell away as though it knew it was visiting. He sat down on the bank beside her and looked at the lake, which was grey and wide in the morning light. "You're worried," she said. "I'm prepared," Percy said. "There's a difference. You can be both." "I'm not worried," he said then. "I'm listening to what it might be like. I can feel it from here at the bottom of the lake. It's not threatening, it's just enormous and old, and whatever it's been guarding matters enough that it's been sitting there for thousands of years waiting for the right person to come and ask. And you're the right person." "I think so. I'm a child of Poseidon. It was placed by Poseidon in terms of family credentials." "Does that make you nervous, having credentials?" Percy looked at her. "I mean knowing that you're the one who's supposed to do something. Whether you chose it or not." She was looking at the lake, not at him, the way people look at something else when they're really talking about themselves. "Whether it was decided before you even knew it was a question." He sat with that for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "sometimes, but I've found the things you didn't choose are still yours once you decide to be in them. You can decide to be in them." He looked at the lake, the grey morning water holding its stillness. "It doesn't stop being a choice just because someone set it up first." She was quiet for a while. "Then I'm going to try out for the Quidditch team." "Good. They might say no." "They might. Then you try again next year." "What if they say no then too?" "Then you've been practicing for 2 years and you try the year after." He stood, brushing grass off his trousers. "The answer to what if they say no isn't don't try, it's try better." She looked up at him. Something in her expression was the look of someone deciding to believe something they've been told, which was different from being convinced and more important. "Okay," she said. He offered his hand. She took it and he pulled her to her feet, and they walked back up toward the castle in the clear, cold morning, the lake behind them holding its ancient, patient secret, and 40 feet down in the dark water something enormous and old, and completely still, was listening to the sound of his footsteps moving away with the particular attention of something that has been counting days for 1,000 years, and has just realized the counting is almost done. Friday came. Chapter 4. Olympus sends a memo. She arrived on a Wednesday and the owls nearly rioted. Percy was in the middle of breakfast when it happened, a disturbance at the owl post entrance that started as a flutter and escalated into a full-scale ornithological event, feathers and angry hooting, and 3 Hufflepuff owls departing their posts entirely in protest. The barn owl that finally made it through was carrying a message sealed with the symbol Percy recognized immediately, a grey owl in profile, no words, just the mark, Athene's house. He put down his fork. The letter was short. Percy read it twice. "You were supposed to come back to camp 3 weeks ago. Chiron sent 4 letters. You didn't respond to any of them because Sirius responded to all of them on your behalf, which is technically not the same thing. The situation on the western border has escalated. Also, I've been tracking an interesting intersection between Hecate's domain and a specific school in Scotland that you happen to be currently attending. I'll arrive Thursday." Percy showed it to Harry across the table. Harry read it. Annabeth. "She sounds efficient," Percy said. "That's just how she writes. That's terrifying is what it is." "She's not terrifying." Percy folded the letter. "She's just always 3 steps ahead and prefers to communicate from that position." "Is she going to cause problems?" "Define problems." Harry looked at him steadily. "She's going to cause the kind of problems where things get figured out faster than they would otherwise," Percy said, "which is not the same as problems. It kind of is, Harry said. She arrived Thursday, not on the Hogwarts Express, not by Owl Post or Flu Network or any of the conventional methods. She arrived by grey rental car from Edinburgh, with a single bag over one shoulder and a rolled architectural drawing under her arm, at 2:10 in the afternoon, at the main gates of Hogwarts, where she stopped and looked at the castle for approximately 30 seconds with the specific focus of an engineer examining a structure before deciding what she thinks of it. Percy and Harry were at the gates because Dumbledore had told them she was coming and suggested they meet her, which Percy suspected was partly hospitality and partly Dumbledore's genuine interest in seeing what happened when a daughter of Athene walked into his school. Annabeth Chase was 13, which it was important to understand because she operated in a way that made that fact feel like a technicality. She was tall for her age, with grey eyes that were currently moving across the castle's facade with the systematic efficiency of a structural assessment, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid. She had the camp bead necklace, the New York Yankees cap clipped to her bag, and the expression of someone who has been in genuinely dangerous situations often enough that she assesses environments before she assesses people in them. She finished looking at the castle and looked at Percy. "You didn't respond to my letter," she said. "I got it this morning. I sent it Wednesday. Owl Post from New York to Scotland. How fast were you expecting? I sent a back channel through Hermes's post. It should have arrived in 2 hours." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "You went in the lake. How do you know about the lake?" "Chiron knows. Chiron told me." She finally looked at Harry, which she'd been pointedly not doing until she'd addressed the Percy situation, and extended her hand with the brisk directness of someone who was moving through an agenda. "Harry Potter, I've read about you." "Good things," Harry said, shaking her hand. "Accurate things," Annabeth said, which was, Percy knew, a genuine compliment. Harry blinked. "Right, Percy says you're efficient. Percy says a lot of things." She turned and looked at the gates. "Are we going in or are you going to stand here?" They went in. She walked through Hogwarts the way she walked through everything, with complete situational awareness and no apparent awe, which Percy found comfortable, and which Harry seemed to find faintly destabilizing in the best way. She asked questions as they moved through the corridors, but the questions were specific. What is the structural age of this wing versus that one when were the wards last reseated? Is the defensive perimeter anchored to the physical structure or to the bloodline of the headmaster, and so on? Harry answered what he knew, admitted what he didn't, and said, "I'll ask Hermione," approximately 4 times in the first corridor. "Who's Hermione?" Annabeth said. "She knows everything about Hogwarts." "You'll get along." "I don't always get along with people who know everything about things," Annabeth said. "Sometimes they've learned the wrong things." "She'll have read the right things," Harry said confidently. "If you tell her what you need to know, she'll already know it, or she'll have read it within the hour." Annabeth considered this. "Okay." They found Hermione in the library, which was where Annabeth was heading anyway on her environmental assessment circuit. Hermione looked up from a book about Hogwarts ward structure. She'd been doing her own investigation since Percy's conversation with Dumbledore, and looked at Annabeth the way Percy had seen 2 dogs look at each other when they're both intelligent enough to realize it, equal parts assessing and deciding. Annabeth looked at the book Hermione was reading. "Ward structure, are you working on the ward problem?" "What ward problem?" Hermione said. "If the Deep Warden is activated, the castle's current defensive wards are going to conflict with whatever it's been set to do. They're operating on different magical systems and they haven't been harmonized in probably 1,000 years. Annabeth set her architectural drawing on the table, unrolled it. It was a hand-drawn structural diagram of the castle, based on whatever she'd observed in approximately 12 minutes of looking at it. It was remarkably accurate. "I've been thinking about this since Chiron briefed me." Hermione looked at the diagram. She stood up and came around the table and looked at it more carefully, and Percy watched the shift in her expression from evaluation to genuine engagement. "You drew this from looking at the exterior and the portions of the interior we walked through in 12 minutes. I'm good at spatial reasoning." Annabeth pointed to a section of the diagram. "The foundation layer here, this is older than the rest. The wards on the surface are Hogwarts-era at the earliest, but the foundation is running something else. See how the magical trace? I'd need to check the ward records to confirm the trace signature. I have a method for checking it directly. Do you have any chalk?" Percy sat down next to Ron, who had arrived at the library shortly after them and was watching Annabeth and Hermione with the expression of a spectator at a very fast sport. "Are they going to be friends?" Ron said quietly. "They're already friends," Percy said. "They just don't know it yet." "How long will the not knowing it stage take?" "About 4 more minutes." He was wrong, it took 3. The 4 of them, Percy, Harry, Annabeth, Hermione, with Ron providing moral support and practical assistance in the form of fetching books and holding chalk, spent the rest of Thursday afternoon working through the ward problem that Annabeth had identified, and that Hermione had, upon encountering it, immediately decided was the most intellectually interesting problem she'd engaged with since Percy had started asking her theory questions. The problem was this: the Deep Warden, according to Dumbledore's account and the Founder's records, operated on a system of power that predated the school's own magic. When Percy went into the lake on Friday and spoke to it, if it spoke, And if it activated whatever it had been set to do, the school's existing wards would register this as an external power event and respond to it. Depending on how they responded, the result could be anything from mild ambient disruption to a full defensive lockdown of the castle. "We need a bridge," Annabeth said, tapping her diagram with the chalk. "Something that can operate in both systems simultaneously, something that can tell the castle wards that the warden's activation is authorized." "The headmaster's authority should do that," Hermione said. "In theory, but Dumbledore's authority is coded to the Hogwarts system. The warden's system predates Hogwarts entirely. It's like trying to use a modern key in an ancient lock. The key works, but you need an adapter." "What's the adapter?" Harry said. Annabeth and Hermione looked at each other. "Percy," they said simultaneously. Percy looked up from the book he'd been reading. "I'm the adapter. If you go in as the interface between both systems, you're a child of Poseidon, so the warden recognizes you as authorized, and you're enrolled at Hogwarts, so you're within the castle's ward boundary as a recognized entity." Annabeth was sketching something on the diagram rapidly. "If you maintain contact with both systems at the moment of activation, you could function as the bridge. The wards read you as safe, the warden reads you as authorized. They don't conflict because they're both reading you as the same thing, aloud." "That's elegant," Hermione said, with the tone of someone who has just encountered a solution they wish they'd thought of first. "It's also risky," Annabeth said without false modesty. "If the warden's response to Percy is more than he can manage while maintaining his connection to the castle wards, he drops one of them. If he drops the ward connection, the castle registers an unauthorized power event. If he drops the warden connection, the warden interprets it as a rejection," Percy said. He'd worked this part out himself. "And a 1,000-year-old guardian entity interpreting rejection probably doesn't result in anything good. So don't drop either one," Harry said. "That's the plan," Percy agreed. "Reassuring," Ron said. "It's manageable," Percy said. And he meant it not as performance, but as the specific assessment of someone who had held multiple complex water dynamics simultaneously in life-or-death conditions before, who knew the difference between what he could and couldn't sustain. He'd find the limit. He hadn't reached it yet. "I can hold two systems. It'll be a lot of weight in one place, but I can hold it." Annabeth looked at him with the grey eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. "You're sure?" "No. But I'm sure enough." She held his gaze for another moment, then she nodded once with the specific economy of someone for whom a nod is a full endorsement. "Okay, then we work the plan." They worked the plan. Friday came again, a different Friday than the one they'd already had, the one that had led to the lake that had led to Dumbledore that had led to the letter from Annabeth, and now here they were. An accelerating sequence that was starting to feel less like a series of events and more like a single event in the process of happening. The five of them gathered at the lake edge at midnight. Dumbledore was there, which Percy had expected, and Harry had apparently not, judging by his expression. Lupin was there too, standing slightly behind Dumbledore with his hands in his coat pockets, and the expression of a man who has been told something is safe, and believes the person telling him but is maintaining appropriate professional skepticism. The lake was black and still in the moonless night. The castle threw its lights across the grounds and the water caught them and held them badly, distorted, like light remembered rather than light seen. "Ground rules," Annabeth said to Percy, because Annabeth had ground rules for everything, which was one of the reasons Percy had never actually died. 40 minutes maximum. If you don't have contact with the warden in 40 minutes, you come up. "Okay." "Harry maintains the ward connection from up here. Lupin will talk him through it. Dumbledore will anchor." Harry nodded, already holding his wand with the ready stillness of someone who knows what they're doing. "I'll be monitoring the ward signature from the bank," Hermione said, with a small device she and Annabeth had worked out using a combination of Greek and wizarding principles that Percy didn't fully understand and had decided to trust because both of them had explained it and it had made sense when they explained it. "Ron," Annabeth said. "I know," Ron said. "I'm the emergency. You're the signal. If anything on the surface goes wrong, you signal and Percy comes up. No waiting to see how it develops." "Got it," Ron said with the competent steadiness that he produced in situations like this, where being steady and competent was what the situation needed, which was something Percy had come to rely on and was glad of. Annabeth looked at Percy. They'd had their version of this conversation before at Camp Half-Blood, before other things, other water, other deep dark places. It was a shorter conversation each time because less needed to be said each time. "Don't be a hero," she said. "I'm always a hero," Percy said. "Don't be only a hero, come back." "I always come back, Percy." "Annabeth," he held her gaze. "I'll come back." She stepped back. He turned to Harry. Harry was already watching him. There wasn't much to say and they both knew it, which was a specific kind of closeness, the kind that doesn't need language to be complete. Harry extended his fist and Percy tapped it with his own, the way they'd started doing after training sessions, the private signal of "we're good, we're solid, we're in this." 40 minutes, Harry said. "Or less," Percy said. "Hopefully less." He walked into the lake. The cold hit him everywhere at once, which for Percy was more like a greeting than a shock. He walked out until the water was at his chest, Then he let it take him, stopped walking, let himself go horizontal, and the lake accepted him with the easy welcome of all water accepting him, the pressure adjusting around him, his body knowing immediately what it was in and how to be in it. He went down 60 feet. The castle's lights disappeared. The water went from cold to cold and dark, the specific dark of deep fresh water that has no light source and hasn't had one in a very long time. Percy moved through it the way you move in a familiar room in the dark, by feel, by sense, by the knowledge of where things are without needing to see them. He felt the warden before he saw it. The pressure changed, not dramatically, not threatening, just the specific change of approaching something that has significant mass and has been completely still for a very long time. The water around it was different, older, slower. The molecules, Percy had always thought, moved differently near things of divine origin, more deliberately, as though aware they were in significant proximity. He went deeper. It was on the floor of the lake, in the deepest central basin, and it was enormous. Not a creature in the way the giant squid was a creature, not organic in the simple way, though it had been alive once, or was a kind of alive, or was a form of alive that didn't have a human word for it. It looked, insofar as Percy could see in the absolute dark of the deep water, like a figure made of water itself, not transparent but continuous with the lake, its edges the same temperature and salinity as the surrounding water, only distinguishable by its shape and by the specific pressure it exerted on the space around it. A guardian, ancient, his father's work in the age before names. Percy stopped moving about 10 feet away and held himself still. The warden turned toward him. Or didn't turn, it didn't have a head in the strict sense, but its attention moved toward him the way a current moves toward a disturbance, the whole of it reorienting to the new thing in its space. Percy felt the moment it recognized him. It was like a key in a lock that hadn't been turned in centuries, resistance, recognition, and then a click that wasn't audible but was completely unmistakable. Then it spoke. It didn't speak in Greek or English or any language that had words. It spoke in water, in pressure and current, and the specific language of the sea that Percy had been learning since before he knew he was learning it, the way you learn your first language, by being in it. Child, it said in that language. Yes, Percy said back in the same way. Long, it said, and it meant, I have been waiting a long time. I know, Percy said. What are you guarding? A pause. Not hesitation, the pause of something that has been asked a question it finds slightly surprising, the way you're surprised when someone asked you to explain something you've known so long it stopped feeling like information. The anchor, it said. Anchor for what? Another pause, then for the balance, the place where both orders meet. Percy held this. He thought about the shared line in the prophecies. He thought about Dumbledore's phrase, both orders. He thought about what Annabeth had said about the intersection of Hecate's domain and Hogwarts. Show me, he said. The warden moved. It was the most graceful thing Percy had ever seen underwater, which was a significant statement. It moved the way deep ocean currents move, not fast, not slow, just inevitable, with the economy of something that has never wasted effort in its existence. It moved toward the lake floor, and the floor opened, or revealed itself to have already been open, a passage that Percy hadn't detected because it was made of the same water as everything around it, just shaped differently. He followed it down. The passage went through the lake bed into the rock, and then through the rock into the channel system below, the ancient underground river he'd felt since the first night. 60, 80, 100 feet deeper than he'd been before, deeper than the lake itself, into the precastle rock that held something older than anything above it, and then a chamber. It was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet across, floored in the same ancient stone as the channel walls, and it held water, but different water, still water, water that hadn't moved or mixed with the channel current, held separate in the chamber the way something precious is held separate from everything that might dilute it. In the center of the chamber, on the stone floor beneath the still water, was a seal, not a wax seal. A seal in the ground itself, carved or placed or grown over geological time, the symbol of a trident intertwined with a wand, two systems braided together into a single form. The stonework was different from the rest. One side Olympian, impossible old, the specific aesthetic Percy recognized from the deep-sea temples, the other side structured and intentional in a way that suggested human magic of extraordinary skill, the early wizarding work that preceded Hogwarts by perhaps several centuries. Two worlds, one anchor, this, the warden said, the balance point where both orders were set to meet, made together in the age before the separation. Before the separation, Percy said slowly. When were they separated? When the world decided to be two things instead of one. The warden's voice was perfectly matter-of-fact about this, the way very old things are matter-of-fact about history. It does not change what it is. The anchor remains, the agreement remains. What agreement? That when both were threatened together, the two children would come to the balance point. That is why it was sealed. That is why I was placed. A pause. You are one. Where is the other? Percy looked at the ceiling of the chamber, through 100 feet of rock and water, up through the channels, up through the lake bed, up through the water into the night air where Harry was standing on the bank with his wand out and his connection to the castle wards bright and steady. He's up there, Percy said. He should be here, the warden said. He can't breathe water. The chamber breathes, the warden said, with the patient simplicity of a thing that has planned for this. It moved to the edge of the chamber, and the water there shifted, not drained, but withdrew, pulled by a force Percy recognized as related to his own, the same bloodline's power in a different form. And where the water withdrew, air came, old air, compressed, held in the rock, the specific ancient reserve of a space that had been designed for human occupation. The chamber could hold air. It had been designed to. Percy looked at the seal on the floor. He looked at the chamber. He thought about Annabeth's plan, the bridge, the adapter holding both systems. "Give me 20 minutes, he said to the warden. He went back up. Breaking the surface of the lake was, every time, a specific kind of clarity, the shift from one element's complete sensory world to another, the sudden weight of open air after the pressurized intimacy of deep water. Percy came up 30 feet from the bank and moved toward it, and by the time he was waist-deep, Harry was already wading in despite the temperature and the complete inappropriateness of that for someone who wasn't impervious to cold water. "You were down there for 43 minutes, Annabeth said from the bank with the specific controlled tone of someone who made a rule and watched it be broken. "I found something," Percy said. "Harry needs to come down." A silence on the bank. "I thought we discussed the drowning issue," Harry said beside him in the shallows, his jeans already soaked to the knee. "The chamber has air, the warden made it." Percy looked at Harry directly. "And the warden asked for you, specifically. It said both children need to come to the anchor point." "What anchor point?" Percy described it. "The chamber, the seal, the agreement, the two systems braided together in the stone." He watched Harry's face as he listened, the specific way Harry processed significant information, not reacting before he'd finished taking it in, holding it steady until he had the whole shape of it. When Percy finished, Harry looked at the lake. "How deep?" he said. "About 100 feet through the passage. And you can hold the air bubble." "I've been practicing all week," Percy said. "2 sources, simultaneous. I was holding 3 on Thursday morning." "This is different in nature but similar in principle." "Similar," Harry said. "Similar enough." Harry looked at him for a moment, then he turned to Annabeth. "What do you think?" Annabeth had been listening with the analytical attention she gave to everything. She looked at Percy. "You're sure about the chamber having its own air reserve? It's not manufactured, it's existing." "Existing." The warden withdrew the water. The air was already there, compressed. "Then you'd only need to maintain a connection between Percy and Harry through the passage, 30 seconds at speed, maybe 45, not sustained." She calculated visibly, her eyes moving. "The bubble needs to hold at the surface transition and again at the passage entry. That's where pressure differentials are highest. Can you manage both transition points?" "Yes," Percy said. "Okay." She looked at Harry. "I think you should go." Dumbledore, who had been standing at the edge of the bank during all of this with his hands folded and the expression of a man attending a very unusual event he had been expecting for some time, said quietly, "The anchor point, the seal. Did you recognize the magical signature on the wizarding side?" Percy thought about it. "It was old, very old, not Hogwarts era. Earlier. Early wizarding, yes," Dumbledore said. "Before the formal schools, before the ministry." At the lake with something moving in his expression. "I have suspected for 60 years that Hogwarts was not the first thing built in this place. I suspected the builders chose this site because of what was already here." He paused. "This confirms it. What does the seal do?" Lupin said. "I don't know yet," Percy said, "but the warden said it was for when both orders were threatened together. That's why it needs both of us." He looked at Harry again. "It's not a weapon, it's not a trap. It's a meeting place," Harry said, "both worlds together in one room." "Yeah." Harry pulled his wand from his waistband. He looked at it, then at the lake. Then he put the wand away, which Percy hadn't expected. "I won't be able to cast underwater," Harry said simply, "and I don't need it where we're going." He looked at Percy. "Let's go." They went. The transition, the surface break, the dive. Percy managed the air bubble from the moment Harry went under, maintaining the pocket around his head and upper body with the constant low-grade focus of a maintained spell that required not intense effort but sustained attention. Harry moved with his eyes open in the dark water, trusting Percy's direction, trusting the air, moving without panic in a way that Percy noted and filed as the kind of courage that didn't require audience. The passage, the rock, deeper. Harry's hand on Percy's arm, not grabbing, just contact, a physical connection to help Percy track him through the dark, and the air bubble held perfectly through the transition points, through the pressure differential, through the 100 feet of ancient dark. The chamber. Harry came up out of the passage into the airspace and took a breath, a long one, and then another, settling, recalibrating. Percy surfaced beside him. The chamber was lit by something Percy hadn't noticed on his first visit. The seal itself threw a faint light, blue-silver, the color of deep water and starlight, not enough to see by clearly, but enough to see. Harry looked around, then he looked at the seal on the floor through the still water above it. He said nothing for a moment, then, "That's a trident and a wand." "Yeah, together." "Yeah, that's." Harry stopped, looked at Percy. "How old is this?" "Before memory," Percy said. "That's what the warden said." The warden was present in the chamber, not visible, not exactly, but Percy could feel it, the way you feel something very large standing very close in the dark. Harry seemed to feel it too because his head turned slightly to the left where the warden's attention was most concentrated. "Hello," Harry said, to the chamber in general. The warden turned its attention fully to Harry. Percy felt the moment of recognition happen again, the same click as before but different in character. Before it had been bloodline recognition, like for like, see blood meeting see guardian. This was different. This was the other half of the lock recognizing the other half of the key. Yes, the warden said in the water language, and Harry clearly couldn't hear it, but he clearly felt it because his expression changed. What did it say? Harry asked. Yes, Percy said. I think it just confirmed that you're the right other person. How does it know what's right? It was made when the agreement was made. It knows what the agreement was supposed to produce. Harry looked at the seal again. He crouched at the edge of the still water above it, looking down at the braided trident and wand in the stone. The agreement between what? Olympus and the wizarding world. Between the two oldest powers, Percy said, before either of them had those names. Harry touched the surface of the still water above the seal with 2 fingers. The water rippled, which was strange because still water in an enclosed chamber doesn't ripple without cause, and stranger still because the ripple moved out and down, and the seal below it lit up fully, brightly, the blue-silver light intensifying into something Percy had to look slightly away from. The warden made a sound that wasn't a sound but resonated through the water in every direction, through the rock, up through the channels, up through the lake bed. Percy felt it in his chest, in the water, in his own body, a frequency of recognition that said both children, both here, both chosen, agreement active. Then it said something else. Something Percy had to work through to understand because it was in a register he hadn't encountered before, deeper than anything the warden had previously used. The old enemy moves again. Both enemies, they have begun to speak to each other. Percy and Harry looked at each other in the blue-silver light. Voldemort and Kronos, Harry said. They've started communicating, Percy said, or something representing both of them has. The anchor will hold, the warden said. When the time comes, bring both children here again. The seal will open what it protected, and then not tonight. Tonight it is enough that you both came. The light slowly returned to its low level. The still water settled. The warden's presence pulled back to the chamber's edge, receding into whatever quiet patience it had inhabited for 1,000 years, returning to its waiting with the efficiency of something that has no concept of wasted time. They surfaced 20 minutes later at the lake's edge, and climbed out onto the bank where 4 people were waiting with varying degrees of expressed anxiety. Annabeth with her arms crossed and the face of someone who had spent 20 minutes rehearsing what she was going to say. Hermione with a quill still in her hand from taking notes on the ward monitor. Ron standing with his arms straight at his sides, which was his physical tell for I have been worried, and I am about to be very normal about it. And Lupin, who had the expression of someone for whom the professional and personal had just collided spectacularly. Dumbledore alone was entirely calm. He looked at both of them as they climbed out and said, "Well, they've started talking," Percy said. Voldemort sighed and Kronos' sighed. Whatever Harkin was doing here, it wasn't just assessing me, it was the beginning of something. Dumbledore looked at the lake. The water was black and still again, as though nothing had been disturbed. I see. A pause, and the seal, active, Harry said. It'll open when we need it, not yet. He looked at Dumbledore. The warden said the anchor will hold. I don't know exactly what that means yet. Nor do I, Dumbledore said, but I find myself considerably more confident than I was this morning. He turned from the lake. Come inside. There are things we should discuss, and it is 1:30 in the morning, and I believe Mrs. Granger has been awake since midnight and deserves the information. Hermione made a sound of agreement that she immediately suppressed. They walked back toward the castle, 6 people and 1 invisible ancient guardian entity left behind in the dark water, and the castle lights reflected in the lake as they moved, and the night air was cold and sharp, and Percy walked between Annabeth and Harry and felt not safe. The situation was too live for safe, but located, present, exactly where he was supposed to be. Annabeth said quietly, "You dropped the ward bridge twice in the first 20 minutes. I know," Percy said. "But you held it." "Yeah, good." A pause. The chamber architecture was remarkable, original pre-foundation stonework with the maritime ceiling technique. I want to go back in daylight. Obviously I can't actually go back in daylight, but conceptually. I'll take notes, Percy said. You're a terrible note-taker. I'll ask Hermione. Annabeth said, and pulled her braid back over her shoulder and walked ahead with Hermione, already beginning a conversation that would probably last until 3 in the morning and produce 12 pages of dense notes and at least 1 significant breakthrough in their understanding of the ward problem. Percy watched them go. Harry walked beside him. "Brothers," he said quietly with a different inflection than usual, the one that meant something specific. "Brothers," Percy said back in the same way. The castle opened for them as they approached, the doors recognizing their presence, and the warm light of the entrance hall spilled out into the cold Scottish night, and whatever was coming, both enemies talking, 2 dark powers finding the beginning of their terrible common ground, was still coming, and the seal was waiting in the deep dark water below, and the warden was watching, and Percy walked into the light of the castle that had decided to be his home and didn't look back at the lake. Not tonight. Tonight it was enough. Chapter 5. The night of 2 prophecies. The letter from Sirius arrived on a Thursday morning, and it was not his usual kind of letter. His usual letters were long and slightly chaotic, full of news about the ongoing ministry paperwork, complaints about the price of everything in Edinburgh, occasional reports about Remus stopping by for dinner, and at least 1 story per letter about something that had gone wrong in the house in a minor and domestic way, the kitchen tap that had started running backwards, the portrait in the upstairs hall that had developed opinions about breakfast. His letters felt like being in the same room with him. They felt like home. This letter was 2 sentences. Something has happened. I'm coming to Hogwarts. Don't do anything until I get there. Percy read it twice and showed it to Harry without comment. Harry read it once. Today doesn't say. The tone says today. Yeah, Percy folded the letter carefully. Around them, the great hall moved through breakfast at its normal pace, the noise and the food and the morning light coming through the high windows, and it felt very ordinary and not at all like the kind of morning that should have a 2-sentence letter in it. Hermione appeared at Percy's shoulder from wherever she'd been. She tended to arrive at meals from a different direction than the dormitory stairs, which Ron claimed was because she had a secondary base of operations in the library and which Hermione didn't confirm or deny. She read the letter over Percy's shoulder, which she'd started doing openly rather than subtly, which was actually an improvement in terms of honesty. Something has happened could mean a lot of things, she said. It means something bad, Harry said. You don't know that. He writes long letters. This is 2 sentences. Harry looked at his food without eating it. Sirius only goes short when he's managing something difficult and he doesn't want to write around it. Hermione sat down. What kind of difficult? Percy had already thought through the list, running it the way he ran water channels, mapping the pressure points, finding where the force was coming from. The Ministry had been making noise about Sirius's provisional status since September. Lupin had mentioned carefully that there was pressure from certain departments about the arrangement of 2 unusual boys in one household. Harkin's presence had been investigated, and the result had been a terse Ministry communication that Dumbledore had apparently handled, but that handling had produced its own friction. And there was the Western Border situation at Camp Half-Blood, which Chiron had written about 3 times and which Percy hadn't been able to address and which had been escalating by degrees. Any of these, some of these, all of these. He didn't say any of it out loud because the hall was the hall and some conversations had locations. We'll know when he gets here, Percy said. Annabeth materialized at the table from the Ravenclaw end. She'd been placed with Ravenclaw for meals on Flitwick's suggestion, which had initially seemed like a logistical decision and had revealed itself to be a deeply accurate one, and sat down next to Hermione with a specific expression on her face that Percy recognized as I have information that changes things. Hermes sent a message, she said without preamble, through the post network overnight. Thalia intercepted it at More Actions Right the next chapter now, Brothers of the Ancient Blood chapter 6. Brothers, the water closed over them and the snow became silence. Percy held the air bubble tight around Harry from the moment they submerged, not the effortful grip of something he was fighting to maintain, but the settled, practiced hold of something he'd been building toward all term. The water recognized him the way it always did, immediately, without qualification, and he moved through it with Harry beside him, one hand on Harry's forearm to keep the connection close through the dark. The passage down was familiar now. Percy moved through it with the specific ease of someone who has learned a route by feel, the turn at the rock shelf, the narrowing before the chamber entrance, the pressure differential at the final drop. He managed it clean, no gaps, and when they came through into the chamber it was the same as before, the faint blue-silver from the seal, the air space above the still water, the particular atmosphere of a place that has been waiting without impatience for a very long time. Harry took his first breath and looked at the seal. It's brighter, he said. Percy looked down through the still water at the braided trident and wand in the stone. Harry was right, the light was stronger than it had been on the first night. More active, the same way water gets before a storm, the quality of readiness in it. The warden was present. Percy felt it before he could articulate it, the immense, patient attention filling the chamber, concentrated more fully than before, the way attention concentrates when the thing it's been waiting for finally arrives. You came back, it said in the water language. We came back, Percy said. The note said to ask you what you're holding back, a pause that was not hesitation, more like a breath. Yes, the warden said, there is a second seal. Percy stared at the one on the floor. Second, this seal activates the meeting point. The second seal activates the resolution. They are kept separate because the resolution cannot be accessed until the meeting is confirmed. A long beat of water language silence. The first seal confirmed you. The second seal is the mechanism itself, the thing that can break what neither breaking alone can break. Where is the second seal? It is not in one place, the warden said. It is in 2, half in your world, half in his. Percy looked at Harry, who couldn't hear the warden but who had been watching Percy's face the way he watched Percy in combat, reading what he could, waiting for what he couldn't. 2 halves, Percy said aloud, one in each of our worlds. Harry's expression processed this quickly. Where? Percy asked the warden. The warden answered. The first half was at the bottom of the chamber itself, beneath the existing seal, deeper in the stone, hidden behind the anchor point, placed there by Poseidon before the accord was even drawn. A key made of sea glass and old bronze, the shape of a trident single tine. Percy would be able to feel it when he touched the existing seal's surface. It would come free when the child of his line pressed their full intent against it. The second half was at Hogwarts. In a place that had been there since the beginning. The warden described it in the language of water direction and stonefeel, which Percy translated as best he could into spatial terms Harry would recognize. Harry went very still. The room of requirement, Harry said. You know it. I've never been in it, but there are stories. Harry was thinking fast. Percy could see it. Fred and George mentioned it. It's a room that only appears when someone needs it. It gives you what you require. He looked at the seal on the floor. If Ravenclaw built a contingency into the school, she'd put it in the room that responds to need, Percy said, because it would only become accessible when someone needed it enough, when the right people needed it. And we're the right people. We're the right people, Percy confirmed. He looked at the floor of the chamber at the seal, and then he dropped below the still water surface and put both hands flat on the stone of the seal itself. The bronze and sea glass of it was warm against his palms, not physically warm, warm in the way that power is warm, the specific heat of something that has been holding energy for a very long time and recognizes the hand that can release it. He pressed his intent into it. Not a spell, not a technique, just himself completely without performance or reservation, the full weight of what he was. Son of Poseidon, brother, the person who had walked across a country and an ocean and 8 months of kitchen mornings to be standing in exactly this place. The stone shifted, not the whole seal. Section of it at the center point where the trident tine met the wand's tip, separated with a sound Percy felt rather than heard, a subsonic release like a breath held for centuries finally let go. And there in the space it left, resting in a small hollow in the ancient stone, was a key. He picked it up. Sea glass, grey-green, shaped like a single tine of a trident, no longer than his index finger, warm in his hand, old in a way that made everything around it feel recent. He surfaced. Harry looked at it. That's half, Harry said. That's half, Percy agreed. He held it out. Harry took it carefully, turned it over, and Percy watched the seal's light respond to Harry's touch on it, not the full activation of the first night, just a recognition pulse, a brief brightening, the key knowing it was being held by the right second person. Percy looked at the warden. Thank you. The warden said, there is one more thing. Percy waited. The resolution is not automatic, the warden said. When both halves are joined at the anchor point, it will open the way between both orders simultaneously. What can be broken will be placed before you. The breaking requires a choice, not power. Choice? What choice? That I cannot tell you, the warden said with perfect simplicity, because it is not made yet, because no being placed in advance of a choice can tell you what the choice is, only that it will be clear when you face it, and that both children must make it together. Percy held this, turned it over. Found the edges of it. Is it a sacrifice? He asked. The warden was quiet for a long moment. Every real choice has a cost, it said, but cost is not the same as sacrifice. You will not be asked to end yourselves. A pause. You have already been asked that by the worlds you were born into. The seal does not ask the same thing. Something loosened in Percy's chest that he hadn't known was tight. He exhaled slowly into the chamber's air. Okay, he said. He looked at Harry, who was watching him. We're going up, Percy said. They went up. The snow was still falling when they surfaced, heavier now, real snow, the kind that was going to stick. Percy came out of the water and stood for a moment at the shore, snow landing on his shoulders and melting immediately on the warm skin of his hands, the key in his right fist, and looked at the 5 people on the bank. Sirius was closest. He looked at Percy's expression and then at the key and then back at Percy. He didn't say anything immediately, which was the right call. There's a second seal, Percy said. In 2 halves, we have one. He held it up. Annabeth was at his side in 3 steps, looking at it with the focused attention she gave to artifacts, not touching, just reading. The other half is in the school, a room called the Room of Requirement. I know it, Hermione said. Conceptually, I've never accessed it. You have to walk past a specific section of wall 3 times thinking about what you need. Then we need to go to the school, Harry said. He was already climbing the bank, snow in his hair, his robes soaked, completely unbothered by the cold in the way that happened after he'd been genuinely focused on something. Tonight, now, Harry, Sirius started. Now, Harry said. He turned and looked at Sirius, not defiant, not dramatic, just clear. Whatever is at the bottom of that chamber needs to be activated before Voldemort's people realize we've found the second seal location. Harkin reported back. They know about the first seal. If they're watching the school, which they are, Percy said, then they'll notice the moment I walk past that wall 3 times and the door appears, Harry said. We have a window right now because it's Saturday night and it's snowing and nobody is expecting us to move. He held Sirius's gaze. We go now. Sirius looked at him for what felt like a long time. Percy watched the specific internal negotiation happening in him, the Guardian's instinct to hold them back against the Aura's recognition that Harry was right. The fathers want to make it safe against the soldiers' knowledge that safe and necessary weren't always compatible. I'm coming with you, Sirius said. The wards, Dumbledore began. Adjust them, Sirius said. I'm a registered adult wizard and I'm their guardian and I'm going with them. He looked at Dumbledore. It was not a request. Adjust them. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, then he inclined his head. Right, Sirius said. Let's go. They moved through the snow toward the castle. All of them, the full group, Dumbledore and Lupin in the rear, Sirius alongside Percy and Harry, Annabeth and Hermione talking quietly in front, Ron beside Annabeth maintaining the excellent tactical position of someone who has accepted that he's in the middle of something significant and has decided to be useful rather than alarmed. The castle received them through the side entrance that Lupin knew. Corridors lit by torches, quieter than usual for a Saturday. The snow had kept most students inside and indoors, and the ones who were awake were in common rooms or the Great Hall, not wandering the 7th floor corridor. The 7th floor corridor. Percy hadn't been up here before. It was long and slightly strange, the kind of corridor that felt like it had opinions about being walked through. There was a painting of a man attempting to teach trolls ballet on the opposite wall, which Percy spent approximately 1 second of attention on before focusing on what they were actually here for. The wall, Hermione said. She'd pulled out her notes, of course she'd pulled out her notes and was reading. It's opposite the painting. You walk past it 3 times, concentrating on what you need. The room gives you, I know what I need, Harry said. He walked past the wall. Once. The key in Percy's hand pulsed once, warm, responsive. Harry walked back twice. Annabeth's hand found Percy's elbow, not stopping him, just the contact of someone who processes better with something solid to hold. Percy let her. Harry walked past the wall a 3rd time, and this time a door appeared in the wall where there had been nothing, not gradually, not with ceremony, just suddenly present, as though it had always been there and they'd simply failed to notice it. Old oak, iron fittings, a keyhole in the shape of a wand tip. No handle, Ron said. It has a keyhole, Annabeth said. Everyone looked at the key in Percy's hand. 1 key, Percy said, turning to Harry. 2 halves, 1 composite. The room is a wand-world construct, so this half opens it. He offered the key to Harry. You open it. Harry took it. He looked at the keyhole. He put the key in and turned it, and the door swung open without resistance, without sound, with the specific smoothness of something that has been waiting to open for a very long time and is pleased to finally have the occasion. They went in. The room of requirement had given them something specific. It wasn't a cavernous space of accumulated need. It was a single room, roughly the size of a large sitting room, stone walls hung with something that wasn't quite tapestry and wasn't quite spell-cast illumination. In the center of the room on a stone plinth was the other half, also sea glass, also old bronze, but where Percy's half was a trident tine, this one was a wand length, thin and perfect, and shaped with the specific elegance of very early magical craft. The 2 halves clearly belonged to each other, the same material, the same age, the same purpose, separated into complementary forms. Harry picked it up without hesitation. The moment both halves were being held, Percy's still in Harry's right hand, this new one in his left, the room responded. The light changed. The walls did something that wasn't quite moving and wasn't quite reshaping. A door appeared in the far wall, not an ordinary door, the kind of door that is a direction more than a physical object, opening onto a stairway that went down. That wasn't there when we came in, Ron said. The room gave us what we needed, Annabeth said, and what we needed was the way to the anchor point. From inside the school, Hermione said, not the lake. There's a path from the school directly to the chamber. That's what the room was holding. Sirius moved to the door in the far wall and looked down the stairway. Stone steps, old, the same stone as the foundation of the castle, the same stone as the chamber walls. Where does it come out? The chamber, Percy said. He could feel it, the specific pressure of the deep underground water, the same channel feel he'd navigated 3 times now, but approaching it from a completely different direction. The anchor point was directly below them. The stairway went straight down. No water, Sirius said. No water, Percy confirmed. This is the dry approach. This is the access point Ravenclaw built into the school for exactly this. He looked at the group. The school sits on the anchor. There's always been a way in from above. We just didn't know to look for it. Lupin said quietly. Rowena Ravenclaw built a door in the room of requirement that leads directly to a pre-accord Olympian chamber beneath the lake bed. Yes, Percy said, in the 10th century. She was very good at planning, Annabeth said. She was extraordinary, Hermione said, with a reverence that was completely genuine and slightly overwhelming. She planned for us, Harry said, looking at the open door. He said it with the same tone he'd used in the corridor, the recognition of people who came before you being as capable as you needed them to be. She didn't know our names, but she built the door anyway. Percy looked at him, ready to go through it. I have been ready since October, Harry said. They went down. The stairway was long and the stone was old and the air changed as they went, getting the specific quality of deep underground, cool and still and very quiet. Percy felt the water around them on all sides, the channel system present in the rock, and the anchor point below growing in his awareness like a heartbeat getting louder as you move toward its source. The stairway ended in the chamber. From above, through the stone rather than the water, it looked different, the same circular space, the same still water over the seal, the blue-silver light steady and bright. From this angle, Percy could see that the seal had changed since he'd removed the key. The hollow in the center was open, visible, the 2-part keyhole apparent now that the first half had been taken. The warden was here. More fully present than it had ever been in Percy's experience of it, not larger exactly, but more complete, the way something looks when it stops being partly somewhere else and becomes entirely in the room. Dumbledore stopped at the bottom of the stairway. He looked at the chamber with an expression Percy had not seen on him before, not wonder exactly, not surprise. The expression of a man in the presence of something that has been beyond his reach for 60 years, that is finally fully visible. He didn't speak, he stayed at the edge. Lupin stayed with him. Sirius moved into the chamber proper and stood at the perimeter, wand at his side, the specific stance of an aura, present, watchful, not interfering. Annabeth touched Percy's arm. Go. Percy and Harry moved to the center of the chamber. The still water came up to their ankles, cold through their already soaked shoes. The seal was directly below them, glowing, the hollow of the missing key waiting at its center. Harry had both halves in his hands. Percy looked at them, held side by side. They were clearly mirror pieces, the tine and the wand length that belonged to each other. Together, Percy said. Together, Harry said. They each took a half, the natural distribution, trident tine to Percy, wand length to Harry, the same bloodline logic that had put them here in the first place, and crouched together at the edge of the seal. The warden said in the water language that Percy had stopped trying to translate and simply understood. Press both halves into the keyhole simultaneously. The seal will open. What is placed before you will be the choice. Choose clearly. Percy looked at Harry. On three. On three, Harry said. 1. The blue-silver light intensified, slow and certain, the way dawn intensifies. 2. Percy felt every drop of water in the chamber become aware, the still water over the seal, the water in the channel system beyond the walls, distantly the lake above, distantly the sea beyond that. His father's domain, all of it, breathing. 3. They pressed the two halves into the keyhole at the same moment. The sound was not sound. It was the frequency of something fundamental being acknowledged, the deep stone resonance of a lock opening that had been closed since before either of their worlds had their current names. Percy felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in the water, in his own body. Harry made a sound that was not pain, more like the involuntary response to something too large arriving too quickly. The seal opened, not physically. The stone didn't move. What opened was the space above it, the still water parted, and in the cleared air between the surface and the seal's face, something appeared that was both in the chamber and not in the chamber, existing in the specific superposition of things that belonged to more than one reality simultaneously. Two images, side by side, translucent, detailed, absolutely clear. One was a map, not a geographical map, a structural one. A network of 7 objects, each one bright with the specific dark bright signature Percy had felt on Harkon's forearm, but worse, deeper, more entangled, more wrong. Each one connected to a central point, each one a piece of something that should not have been divided. Horcruxes. All 7 mapped, located, the precise structural logic of their relationship to each other, and to the central soul point laid out with a clarity that Percy had no frame of reference for, but that Harry clearly did, because Harry's face had gone still in a way Percy had only seen once before in a training session where they'd hit a genuinely new problem. I can see them, Harry said very quietly. I can see all of them. 7, Percy said. 7. And Harry's eyes moved through the image, fast, cataloguing. There's an 8th, there shouldn't be an 8th, but there's a connection I don't. He stopped. His expression changed rapidly through several things Percy couldn't fully name, and then settled into something that was not fear but was as serious as anything Percy had ever seen on him. Later, Harry said, I'll explain later. Okay, Percy said. He trusted that. He looked at the second image. The second image was different, not a map, a shape, a sarcophagus. Ancient Titan era, the carvings on it, the specific Chronos era iconography that Percy had seen in the deep-sea temples and in the artifacts at Camp Half-Blood. Inside the sarcophagus, visible through the translucent image, was the slow dark movement of something reforming, not fully present, not complete, the way a reflection is present in water. Chronos in partial regeneration. The specific pieces of him that had survived dissolution, held together by a process that used the fractures in the boundary between life and death as its scaffolding. The fractures that Voldemort's Horcrux magic had created. They're connected, Percy said. Look, he pointed to the edge of the Horcrux map where the dark, bright signature of the outermost Horcrux was slightly different from the others, slightly warmer, the specific warmth of Titan-era corruption rather than dark wizard work. This one. Someone replaced it or something touched it. Chronos' regenerative magic has bonded to this Horcrux. Which one is it? Harry said. The oldest, the one made first. Percy looked at the image. The diary. The diary was destroyed, Harry said. Second year I destroyed it. Something from it survived, Percy said. The regenerative bond doesn't need the object intact. It needs the impression it made, the connection it established. He thought about this, working the logic. Horcrux magic leaves a mark in the world even when the object is gone, and Chronos' regeneration is using those marks as anchors for his return. He's not working with Voldemort, he's working with Voldemort's shadow. Every time a Horcrux is destroyed, it leaves a trace in the boundary between life and death, and that trace is one more handhold for Chronos to pull himself back with. Annabeth had come forward without Percy noticing. She was looking at the second image with the expression she wore for problems that were large and structural and required everything she had. He's using your enemy's destruction as his fuel, she said. Every Horcrux that gets destroyed makes the boundary thinner. Every thin point in the boundary makes it easier for Chronos to come through, Percy finished. So destroying Voldemort's Horcruxes, Harry said, helps Chronos come back, Percy said. Simultaneously, the chamber held this. The warden was very still. Sirius at the perimeter had gone completely silent in the way of a man hearing something that changes the shape of a situation he thought he understood. Then what's the breaking? Harry said. The thing neither of us can break alone that together we can, because if destroying Voldemort helps Chronos, we don't destroy them sequentially, Percy said. He was working it out as he spoke, following the logic the way he followed water, not imposing a direction, just letting the natural flow reveal itself. We destroy them simultaneously, both sources at the same moment. If you remove all of Voldemort's Horcruxes in one action and I deal with Kronos' regeneration anchor in one action, the same moment, neither destruction leaves a boundary thin spot because the boundary closes before the thinness can become useful. They feed on sequence, Annabeth said, following it. Break the sequence and they both lose their fuel. But that requires, Hermione had come forward too, her voice low and rapid, her mind visibly running. That requires knowing where every Horcrux is, having a plan for dealing with Kronos' regeneration anchor and executing both simultaneously, which means coordinated action across two separate worlds in the same window, Annabeth said. Magical destruction of the Horcrux network from Harry's side, Olympian intervention against the regeneration anchor from Percy's. The same moment, Harry said. The same moment, Percy confirmed. Harry looked at the two images still hanging in the air above the seal. He looked at the map of Horcruxes, the 8 connections, the one that had Kronos' warmth in it. He was very quiet for a moment, then he said, "We're not doing this tonight." Percy looked at him. "We're not ready tonight," Harry said. Not with fear, with the specific clarity of someone who has done honest accounting and arrived at an honest answer. "We don't have the full plan for Kronos' anchor. We don't know all the Horcrux locations yet. The 8th," he paused and something moved through his expression. "The 8th is complicated. I need to think about the 8th. He met Percy's eyes directly. "But I know what we need and I know what we're doing. That's enough for tonight." Percy held his gaze. He read it, the full shape of it, the weight of whatever Harry had seen in that map that he wasn't saying yet, the thing about the 8th connection that had changed his expression in that specific way. "Okay," Percy said, "we know what we're doing. Right, and we do it together." "That's the only version of it," Harry said, simply, completely. The images above the seal faded slowly, going translucent and then absent, and the seal itself settled back to its steady blue-silver glow, the keyhole now fitted with both halves permanently, the key elements fused into the stone. The warden made its deep-water resonance of acknowledgement, not the activation signal from before, something quieter, the specific sound of a purpose having been recognized. Percy looked at the warden in the chamber. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," the warden said. "Did you know we'd get here?" A pause that felt like the pause of something that has watched a great deal of time from the bottom of a lake and has developed complicated feelings about certainty. "I knew what you were," the warden said. "I knew what was needed. Whether you would arrive," another pause, "was always yours. I was placed here for the contingency. Whether the contingency came was never mine to know." Percy thought about that. "Thank you," he said, "for waiting." The warden's presence shifted, not withdrawing, something different. The closest thing Percy could categorize it as was acknowledgement, the movement of something very old that has been thanked sincerely and doesn't quite know what to do with it. "Go," the warden said. "Come back when you're ready. I will be here." They went up the stairway. The room of requirement was unchanged, warm and lit, the door to the corridor standing open. Percy and Harry came out of it into the 7th-floor corridor and the rest of them came up behind, and the door behind them closed and disappeared as though it had never been there. Everyone stood in the corridor. The snow was still falling outside the high windows, heavy, settled now, coating the grounds in white. The castle was quiet around them, the specific deep quiet of a Saturday night past midnight, the kind of quiet that had its own substance. Sirius put his hands on both their shoulders, not a speech. Just the grip, firm, present, the physical language of someone who is here and intends to stay here. "Right," he said. "It's midnight, we're all soaking wet, and whatever that was, we're not doing the next part tonight." He looked at Dumbledore. "Albus, we need to talk about the 8th. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with an expression Percy had not seen on him before. It was the look of a man who has been carrying knowledge for a long time that he knows he will have to give away, and who has just understood that the moment is arriving faster than he'd prepared for. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "Yes, we do." "Not now," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "Not tonight," Harry said. I need tonight, just tonight." He looked at Dumbledore. "Tomorrow, first thing, I need tonight." Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment, then he said, "Tomorrow. First thing," and the way he said it was the fullest acknowledgement Percy had ever heard from him, not a concession, an agreement, the genuine recognition that Harry was owed this one night. "Okay," Harry said. They went back toward Gryffindor Tower. Dumbledore and Lupin peeled off toward the headmaster's office, Dumbledore moving with the deliberate quiet of a man with things to prepare. Annabeth walked with Hermione, their conversation resumed in low voices, the note-taking already happening. Ron walked with Sirius, the two of them talking in the easy register that Ron fell into with adults he trusted, which he'd arrived at with Sirius somewhere around October. Percy walked beside Harry. The corridor was warm and the portraits were sleeping and the castle was doing its night sounds around them, the small arguments of old stone, the distant steps of Peeves who was somewhere and in theory always a problem and in practice tonight somewhere else. They walked without talking for a while. Then Harry said, "The 8th Horcrux." "Yeah," Percy said, "I know what it is." A pause. "I've known something was off since for a while, since before tonight. The seal just made it visible." Another pause, longer. "It's me." Percy stopped walking. Harry stopped too, a step ahead and turned around. He was steady, not the forced steadiness of someone managing panic, the deep steadiness of someone who has had this knowledge arrive in stages and has processed each stage as it came, and is now at the final stage, which is saying it out loud to the person you say things out loud to. "Voldemort made a Horcrux the night he came to Godric's Hollow," Harry said. He didn't mean to. He made one accidentally in the rebound of the killing curse. A fragment of his soul attached itself to me. I've been carrying it since I was 1 year old. He held Percy's gaze. For it to end properly, completely, it has to be destroyed. In you, Percy said. In me. The corridor was very still. Percy thought about the warden's words. You will not be asked to end yourselves. He held that. He put it next to what Harry had just said. He found the seam where they fit together. The seal, Percy said slowly. The simultaneous action. If the Horcrux in you is destroyed at the same moment as the regeneration anchor, not sequentially, simultaneously, the boundary closes before the fragment's dissolution creates a new thin point, Harry said. And because Kronos' anchor is also gone in the same window, there's nothing to come through even if a thin point formed. He was thinking it through at the same time as Percy, their two minds running the same logic from different angles. The rebounded killing curse doesn't need to kill me. The Horcrux needs to be destroyed, not the person carrying it. Dumbledore knows something about this, Percy said. Yeah, that's what tomorrow is for. Harry looked at his hands. He's known there was an 8th. He's been trying to work out how to tell me. You knew too. I suspected. The seal confirmed it. A long pause. I'm not Percy. I'm not afraid of it. I want you to know that. Percy looked at him. He looked at the person who had walked down a dark stairway into a pre-Roman chamber without hesitation, who had held his position in a lake 40 minutes past an agreed limit, who had stood in front of a boggart's version of his godfather and come back from it without showing the wound, who had eaten bad cheese in an Edinburgh kitchen and built a life in a house that hadn't been a home until he'd been in it long enough to make it one. He wasn't performing bravery. He wasn't managing fear. He was being honest about something that was real and large and that he'd sat with long enough to know its shape. I know, Percy said. You'd tell me if you were worried, Harry said. I'd tell you. And you're not. I'm working on a plan, Percy said. Worry is what you do when you don't have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan. A beat of silence. You're something else, you know that, Harry said. Son of a sea god, Percy said. Comes with the territory. Harry laughed. Not the small quiet kind. The full one, the one Percy had counted 6 times before and had now lost count of, which was the best possible failure of tracking he'd ever had. It lasted only a few seconds and then settled back into the warm steady that was Harry's natural register. Come on, Harry said. The common room fire will still be going. They went. The common room was empty at this hour, the fire down to deep orange coals, the armchairs holding the warm shapes of an evening of use. Percy dropped into his usual one, the one with the slightly broken arm that nobody else sat in because of the broken arm, which had become his by default, and which he'd come to associate with the specific comfort of the common room in a way he'd never expected when he arrived. Harry took the one across from it. Neither of them spoke for a while. Percy looked at the coals. The light they threw was the color of something deep in the sea, the specific orange red that appeared at depth when surface light was filtered down through fathoms of water. He'd always found it peaceful, that color, the deep fire light. He thought about Camp Half-Blood, about the Long Island Sound in summer, the specific smell of the water at the dock, the way the flag snapped in a sea breeze during Capture the Flag, about his mother in New York, alive and safe, Sunday phone calls, her laugh that came easily. About Annabeth, who had come here from across an ocean because she'd been worried, which for Annabeth was as close to a declaration as you got. About Chiron, who had sent 4 letters and accepted the responses from Sirius with the patience of someone who understood that things were unfolding as they needed to. He thought about Edinburgh, the kitchen, the fog, the terrible cooking, the back garden training sessions in the rain, the cork board with his 11-year-old drawings on it that Sirius refused to take down. He thought about sitting at the Hogwarts sorting stool while a 1,000-year-old hat read him and decided he was loyal to the point of absurdity. He thought about Ginny Weasley on the bank of the lake at 7 in the morning telling him his middle current was drifting left. About Ron at the chessboard, operating at an altitude nobody gave him credit for. About Hermione's pocket journal and the 12 pages of dense notes that were going to be, at some future point, genuinely important. He thought about Harry across the common room firelight, who had an 8th Horcrux in his chest and was sitting there steady and unbothered and thinking about a plan. We need Sirius involved in the Kronos anchor plan, Percy said. Yeah, and Lupin. His experience with the boundary between his condition gives him a specific understanding of liminal states that could be useful. Agreed. And Annabeth for the structural side. She'll have architectural questions about the anchor's physical location that I won't think to ask, obviously, and Hermione for the theoretical framework on simultaneous destruction. She'll want to model it. She's already modeling it, Harry said. She started when you said the word simultaneous action in the chamber. Percy almost smiled. Good, the Horcrux locations, Harry said. There are 7 plus me. I know where some of them are. Dumbledore knows more. We need the full map. Tomorrow, Percy said, with Dumbledore the full picture. Tomorrow, Harry agreed, another silence, comfortable, the kind that was full rather than empty. Percy, Harry said. Yeah, I'm glad you came to Edinburgh. Percy looked at the fire. He thought about all the different ways you could respond to something like that, deflect it, make it a joke, send it back as a question. He thought about how Harry had said it, simply, directly, without performance. The way Harry said all true things. Me too, Percy said, because it was true and true things deserve to be said out loud. Sirius's terrible cooking and all, especially the cooking. the drawn-in marker training grid in the back garden. The grid had character, the portrait in the upstairs hall with opinions about breakfast, the portrait made good points, the completely inadequate fridge, the cheese was always there, the cheese was always terrible, the cheese was always there, Percy repeated. That's what matters. Harry was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, that's what matters. The fire crackled. The snow was still falling outside the high common room windows, soundless, settling on the grounds and the lake and the old dark hills beyond, and somewhere beneath all of it, 100 feet down in the dark water, an ancient guardian was returning to its patient waiting, its purpose known now to the people who needed to know it, the seal fitted with both its halves, the long work nearly ready to begin. In 3 weeks, Sirius would walk into the Wisengamot, and the hearing would conclude in less than 2 hours because the evidence was clean, and the witnesses were prepared, and Lucius Malfoy's petition would be dismissed with the specific legal finality of a thing that was wrong and could be proven wrong. The exoneration would be formally completed. The provisional arrangement would become permanent. Sirius would step out of the ministry building into the grey London morning and send a letter that would arrive at breakfast the following day and be even shorter than his 2-sentence emergency letter, just one word in his sharp, slanted handwriting. Done. And Percy would keep that letter too, with the one from his father, 2 short letters, the most important ones he'd ever received, but that was in 3 weeks. Tonight the common room fire burned down to its lowest, and the castle breathed around them, and Percy and Harry sat without urgency in the chairs they'd claimed, and the snow kept falling, and everything that was coming, the Horcruxes and the anchor and the simultaneous breaking, and the choice the seal would place before them when they were ready was out there, real, waiting. They were ready for it to wait. They were good at waiting when they were waiting together. The not alone kind of waiting was completely different from the other kind. Percy knew this now in the specific, embodied way. You know, things that living has taught you, not theory, not Hermione's 40 pages, not the water language of a 1,000-year-old guardian, just knowing. His brother was across the fire from him. Everything else was still to come. That was enough.